People believe what fits their beliefs, regardless of truth. At the core of human psychology lies a powerful yet unsettling phenomenon, confirmation bias. This is the deep-seated tendency of individuals to only accept information that aligns with their pre-existing beliefs, regardless of its factual accuracy. When faced with new information, most people will unconsciously filter it through the lens of their beliefs, disregarding any evidence that contradicts their viewpoint. This deeply ingrained mental shortcut allows us to feel validated and secure in our worldview, but it also traps us in a cycle of ignorance, reinforcing existing prejudices and misconceptions. The danger of this behavior goes beyond simply ignoring facts. It actively distorts reality. It's why people cling to falsehoods despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Whether in politics, science, or personal relationships, humans are wired to protect their sense of identity, and beliefs form the bedrock of who we are. When a belief is challenged, it can feel like a direct attack on our very essence. To shield ourselves from that emotional discomfort, we embrace only those ideas that confirm what we already think is true. This psychological defense mechanism isn't just a passive act. It influences our decisions, shapes our interactions, and even impacts our relationships. It pushes us to surround ourselves with echo chambers, reinforcing our biases and keeping us from considering perspectives that could truly expand our understanding. The unfortunate reality is that the truth becomes irrelevant in the face of what we want to believe. Humans act cruelly when detached from consequences. When humans are shielded from the consequences of their actions, the darkness within them can emerge. There's something inherently disturbing about the human capacity for cruelty when no immediate repercussions exist. In situations where individuals feel insulated from accountability, whether by physical distance, anonymity, or authority, they can commit acts of violence, manipulation, or exploitation without remorse. This detachment creates a psychological barrier, making it easier for them to treat others with cold indifference or outright harm. This phenomenon is deeply rooted in human psychology, and it's often exploited in contexts like warfare, bullying, or even online behavior. When a person doesn't have to directly witness the pain they inflict, or when there's no personal responsibility for their actions, the human conscience becomes more malleable. It's why people say and do things online that they would never dream of in person. It's the reason mobs can be so brutal and why torture and abuse can be perpetrated by those in power who feel untouchable. This detachment erodes empathy. The emotional impact of an action is minimized, and in its place, there is a sense of power or control. The disturbing truth is that many are only held back from cruelty by the fear of consequences rather than an intrinsic sense of morality. This makes us question, how different would people be if they were always forced to face the results of their behavior directly? Comfort is often prioritized over truth. It's a painful truth that most humans choose comfort over the hard, often uncomfortable reality of the truth. The human mind craves certainty, stability, and ease. When faced with truths that challenge our beliefs, disrupt our routines, or force us to confront uncomfortable realities about ourselves or the world, we instinctively shy away. Denial becomes a protective shield, a way to avoid the emotional turmoil that comes with accepting the truth. In moments of vulnerability, many opt for a comforting lie, something that feels better in the short term, instead of grappling with a painful truth that could lead to growth or change. This behavior isn't just about avoiding unpleasantness, it's about self-preservation. The mind will often suppress uncomfortable truths because acknowledging them would require us to rethink our actions, challenge our identities, or face fears that are too overwhelming to bear. It's why people stay in unhealthy relationships, ignore alarming health signs, or remain in jobs that stifle them. It's easier to remain in the comfort of ignorance to keep pretending everything is fine, rather than confront what may require significant effort to change. The chilling part of this human tendency is how deeply it influences decisions. Comfort traps us in cycles of stagnation. It locks us in place, preventing growth, and makes us ignore the reality around us. The truth, no matter how brutal, is the only thing that can lead to genuine change, but it's often the hardest path to take. Survival instincts prioritize self over others. At the very core of human nature lies a primal truth. When faced with danger, survival instincts drive us to prioritize ourselves over others. It's an automatic, subconscious response hardwired into our brains, honed through millions of years of evolution. In life-threatening situations, the human brain shifts into survival mode, triggering a cascade of physiological and psychological responses that narrow our focus to self-preservation. The deeper our fear, the stronger the urge to protect ourselves at any cost, often at the expense of those around us. This instinct is a survival mechanism that was crucial for our ancestors, ensuring that they remained alive long enough to pass on their genes. It's why in a crisis, many will make choices that seem selfish or callous to those around them. Whether in natural disasters, accidents, or even stressful social situations, the instinct to save yourself first can overrule empathy or concern for others. This doesn't mean that humans are inherently bad. It's simply an evolutionary trait designed to protect the individual. But the darker side of this instinct becomes evident when it's put into action, revealing how quickly empathy and moral reasoning can be overridden by the survival drive. In times of extreme pressure, people are more likely to abandon others for their own safety, revealing the harsh reality of human nature when survival is on the line. Anonymity breeds selfish behavior. When people are shielded from the consequences of their actions, when they feel anonymous, they often behave in ways they would never consider in the spotlight. Anonymity dissolves the fear of judgment, creating a psychological buffer that allows selfishness and cruelty to surface. Whether online, in large crowds, or when behind closed doors, the lack of personal accountability removes the social constraints that normally govern our actions. The result is a stark increase in selfish behavior, as the individual no longer fears the repercussions of their actions on others. This phenomenon is seen everywhere, from internet trolls attacking people with impunity to those who exploit others in anonymous transactions. When we don't have to face the impact of our choices, the inherent human tendency to put our own needs first intensifies. It's not that people are inherently bad, but that the psychological safety net of anonymity creates a false sense of invulnerability. In these moments, humans act with a selfish disregard for the well-being of others, knowing they won't have to bear witness to the harm they cause. The sad truth is that when people believe no one is watching, they're often at their most self-serving, revealing a stark side of human nature that only emerges when the veil of accountability is lifted. This is why accountability is essential in keeping the darker sides of humanity in check. Appearance often trumps well-being. In a world obsessed with image, it's a harsh truth that appearance frequently takes precedence over well-being. From the clothes we wear to the way we present ourselves online, the pressure to look a certain way often overshadows the importance of feeling good or being healthy. Society has ingrained the idea that success, happiness, and even worth are tied to external appearance. This obsession with how we appear to others can push people to prioritize superficial goals, like fitting into a specific size or maintaining an image of perfection, over their own mental or physical health. People will often sacrifice sleep, stress, management, or eating habits to maintain an image of beauty or success. Social media amplifies this trend, creating a constant stream of comparison that distorts reality and leads to unhealthy body image standards. The desire to be admired or liked can lead individuals to ignore deeper issues such as chronic anxiety, exhaustion, or emotional instability in favor of projecting an idealized version of themselves. The consequences of this can be severe, as the obsession with appearance can lead to eating disorders, mental health struggles, and physical exhaustion. It's easy to get lost in the pursuit of looking perfect, ignoring the fact that well-being isn't visible on the outside. It's something that must be nurtured from within. Yet, the brutal reality is that many choose the fleeting approval of others over the long-term care of their true selves. Self-interest justifies rationalizing immoral actions. Humans possess a remarkable ability to justify behavior that under normal circumstances would be considered immoral. The root of this troubling phenomenon lies in self-interest. When personal gain is at stake, individuals often manipulate their own moral compass, twisting logic and reasoning to fit their desires. It's a psychological defense mechanism that allows us to maintain a positive self-image even when our actions betray our values. This is how people convince themselves that lying, cheating, or exploiting others is acceptable because it serves their interests. This rationalization process is sneaky. It begins with small justifications, like everyone does it, or it's not that bad, and slowly erodes our sense of right and wrong. In the moment, the desire to succeed or protect oneself outweighs the moral implications of their actions. Over time, this becomes easier and more habitual as self-interest constantly drives the justification. The most disturbing aspect of this is that individuals can act cruelly or dishonestly and still believe they are morally good people. It's the essence of cognitive dissonance, holding two contradictory beliefs at once. We tell ourselves that our actions are justified because they benefit us, even when deep down we know they harm others. This is a dark truth about human nature. When self-interest is on the line, morality becomes flexible, and our capacity for rationalizing wrongdoing knows no bounds. Fear of exclusion drives conformity. The fear of being excluded from a group can be an overwhelming force that drives people to conform, often in ways that contradict their personal beliefs or values. Humans are social creatures, wired to seek belonging and acceptance within groups. Throughout history, being part of a group meant survival, protection, and shared resources. This deeply ingrained need to fit in pushes individuals to align their actions, thoughts, and behaviors with the norms of the group, even when those norms are harmful or illogical. When faced with the possibility of being ostracized, the emotional toll can be intense. The brain treats rejection almost like physical pain, activating the same neural pathways that signal distress. As a result, the fear of exclusion can make people compromise their authenticity, leading them to suppress their true selves and adopt the behaviors of the crowd. Whether in social circles, workplaces, or even online communities, the pressure to conform can be suffocating, encouraging people to go along with ideas, even those that are unjust or unethical, simply to avoid standing out. This fear often goes unnoticed by the individual, but it can shape decisions, limit personal growth, and even fuel collective harm. People will silence their doubts, turn a blind eye to injustice, or endorse damaging trends simply to preserve their place within the group. The terrifying truth is that the desire to belong can often overshadow the desire to be right or just. Hatred is easier than empathy. In the complex landscape of human emotions, hatred is often the default response, especially in moments of conflict or discomfort. It's a primal, instinctive reaction that requires little effort and no deep understanding of the other person. Hatred is a quick fix, providing an outlet for frustration, fear, and insecurity, allowing individuals to channel negative emotions outwardly rather than confront their own vulnerability or discomfort. It's easier to hate than to empathize because empathy demands a level of emotional engagement and understanding that can be exhausting and uncomfortable. Hatred, on the other hand, requires no effort to feel. It thrives on division, categorizing people into us versus them, making it simpler to demonize others rather than see their humanity. It gives a sense of control by placing blame externally, thus avoiding the complicated, often painful process of self-reflection. In contrast, empathy requires patience, open-mindedness, and emotional labor, qualities that are far more difficult to summon, especially when we feel threatened or hurt. The painful truth is that in a world of quick judgments and instant gratification, empathy takes a back seat. It's easier to despise someone who holds opposing views or belongs to a different group than to try and understand their perspective. And as this cycle continues, hatred becomes an entrenched pattern, making it harder to break free and connect with others on a deeper, more human level. Comfort often trumps long-term happiness. The pursuit of immediate comfort can often blind us to the importance of long-term happiness. Humans are wired to seek pleasure and avoid discomfort, which is why we often prioritize short-term relief over enduring satisfaction. In a world where instant gratification is more accessible than ever, it's all too easy to choose what feels good in the moment rather than what will lead to genuine fulfillment in the future. This tendency is reflected in everyday choices, opting for a quick fix like junk food or scrolling through social media rather than putting in the effort required for a healthier lifestyle or meaningful relationships. The truth is, comfort feels safe and secure. It promises an escape from the pressures and challenges that are part of real growth. But in the process, it compromises long-term goals, whether that's building a career, fostering deep relationships, or cultivating personal well-being. People often settle for a comfortable existence, one that avoids the uncomfortable challenges that are essential for growth, thinking it will bring them happiness. But that comfort can quickly become a trap, leaving them stagnant and unfulfilled. The irony is that true happiness often requires discomfort, facing challenges, pushing boundaries, and working through difficult emotions. In choosing comfort, many sacrifice the very thing they crave most: lasting, deep contentment. The reality is brutal. Lasting happiness comes from discomfort, but comfort often wins the battle in the short run. Cheating becomes acceptable when others do it. Humans are deeply influenced by social norms and the behavior of those around them. This social contagion is especially evident when it comes to cheating. When individuals see others engaging in dishonest or unethical behavior, it becomes easier for them to justify doing the same. The influence of group dynamics is powerful. If everyone else is bending the rules, why shouldn't I? This mentality makes cheating not only more common, but also more acceptable. In environments where dishonesty is widespread, it creates a culture where ethical boundaries are blurred. People begin to rationalize their actions by telling themselves that cheating is just part of the game, that it's not really a big deal because others are doing it too. This is how cheating becomes normalized, especially in competitive environments like schools, workplaces, or even relationships. It shifts from being an isolated act of moral failure to an accepted behavior within a community. The most disturbing part of this phenomenon is how easily individuals can lose their moral compass in the face of social pressure. What starts as a small transgression can snowball into a pattern of dishonesty, fueled by the belief that everyone else is doing it. The harsh truth is that humans are far more likely to cheat when they see others doing the same, making ethics a matter of relativity rather than absolute truth. Short-term gains are prioritized over long-term benefits. In the battle between instant gratification and future rewards, humans often succumb to the temptation of short-term gains, even when it costs them more in the long run. This behavior is rooted in deep evolutionary wiring. Early humans needed quick rewards to survive in a harsh world. The brain is wired to seek pleasure and avoid discomfort, which makes immediate satisfaction feel far more rewarding than the often distant and uncertain benefits of long-term planning. This mindset is why so many of us make impulsive decisions, whether it's overindulging in food, procrastinating on important tasks, or making reckless financial choices. The promise of immediate pleasure or relief from discomfort is simply too powerful to ignore. It's why people often neglect their health, overspend, or get stuck in unhealthy relationships, because the cost of these decisions feels abstract and distant, while the immediate rewards feel tangible and real. But the true cost of this preference becomes apparent over time. The short-term pleasures we chase often lead to long-term regrets, poor health, strained relationships, or financial ruin. The reality is, the human tendency to focus on immediate rewards sabotages long-term success and fulfillment. In a world that thrives on instant gratification, it's easy to forget that true satisfaction and stability come from delaying immediate pleasure for future growth. Blame is often shifted to others. When things go wrong, the instinct to deflect blame is powerful and universal. Instead of taking responsibility for our actions or mistakes, there's a tendency to point fingers, making others the scapegoats for our failures. This behavior is a defense mechanism driven by the desire to avoid shame, guilt, or personal discomfort. By shifting blame, we preserve our own self-image and protect ourselves from the emotional toll of accountability. The need to be seen as good or right often outweighs the desire to own up to our shortcomings, even when it's clear we've played a role in the problem. This instinct runs deep and can be observed in everything from everyday interactions to high-stakes environments like business or politics. It's easier to accuse others of mistakes than to admit we are imperfect. By placing blame on someone else, we regain a sense of control, pushing the responsibility and the resulting consequences away from ourselves. The disturbing reality is that this tendency to deflect blame can erode trust and prevent meaningful growth. It allows individuals and groups to avoid necessary reflection and learning, perpetuating the cycle of mistakes and failures. When blame is constantly shifted, no one is left to learn from their missteps, and the same patterns of behavior are repeated again and again. Suffering becomes easier to ignore with repetition. There's a chilling truth about human nature. The more we witness or endure suffering, the easier it becomes to ignore. Repeated exposure to pain, whether it's physical, emotional, or social, gradually desensitizes us. What once sparked outrage or empathy becomes background noise over time. It's a coping mechanism, an emotional shield that allows us to survive the overwhelming reality of a painful world. But in this process, something deeply unsettling happens. We lose our ability to truly care. When suffering is continuous, whether through violence, injustice, or personal hardship, the mind adjusts by dulling its emotional response. It's why people can become numb to the suffering of others, whether it's the daily news of violence or the chronic struggles of people around them. What would have once moved us to action now becomes just another headline, another statistic. This desensitization isn't a sign of weakness, but rather of survival, our minds protecting us from the weight of constant pain. But there's a dark side to it. The more we ignore suffering, the less we are motivated to change anything. The more numb we become, the more we accept it as inevitable. Repetition teaches us to tolerate what we should never have to accept, making suffering easier to overlook and, ultimately, perpetuating its existence. Prejudices are defended despite evidence. One of the most unsettling aspects of human nature is the stubbornness with which people cling to their prejudices, even when faced with overwhelming evidence to the contrary. Deeply ingrained biases, whether racial, cultural, or social, create a lens through which we interpret the world. When confronted with facts that challenge these beliefs, many will reject the evidence, not because it's flawed, but because accepting it would force them to confront the uncomfortable truth about their own biases. This psychological defense mechanism is known as cognitive dissonance. the discomfort of holding two contradictory beliefs, and it often leads to the justification of prejudiced views. Rather than adjust their views, people will often find ways to rationalize or ignore evidence that contradicts their prejudices. They may dismiss data as biased, claim that exceptions prove their rule, or simply ignore it altogether. This resistance to change is not only a personal failing, but a deeply social one, reinforcing divisions and perpetuating discrimination. What's truly disturbing is how this defense of prejudice can become so automatic, even unconscious. People don't always recognize they're doing it. This makes it all the more dangerous as it becomes woven into the fabric of everyday interactions, influencing decisions, shaping social structures, and preventing progress toward equality. Prejudices become defended not out of reason, but out of a deeply ingrained need to preserve a comfortable, unchallenged worldview. Lying for self-protection leads to greater harm. The instinct to lie in order to shield oneself from immediate consequences can seem like a simple solution to a difficult problem, but the truth is that it often spirals into a far greater issue. In the moment, lying may feel like a harmless way to avoid punishment, embarrassment, or conflict. It creates a temporary sense of safety, a fleeting escape from uncomfortable truths. But this self-protective deception creates a web of falsehoods that can become increasingly harder to manage and more damaging over time. When you lie to cover up a mistake or misdeed, the lie itself becomes a threat that grows as it is reinforced. One lie requires another to maintain the illusion, and before long, the truth becomes buried beneath layers of deceit. The psychological toll of maintaining a lie is enormous, eroding trust and integrity in relationships. Even worse, the eventual exposure of the truth can lead to far more serious consequences than if the truth had been faced in the first place. People lose respect for those who lie, and once trust is broken, it can be incredibly difficult to rebuild. The harsh reality is that while lying may offer short-term relief, it ultimately leads to long-term harm, alienating others, damaging reputations, and creating a cycle of dishonesty that becomes harder to escape. The truth, no matter how painful, is always a better path in the end. Personal happiness often trumps others' well-being. At the core of human nature lies a harsh truth. Personal happiness is frequently prioritized over the well-being of others. This isn't always about malicious intent. It's about self-preservation and the deep human desire for comfort and satisfaction. In many situations, people choose paths that bring them joy, success, or security, even if those choices harm or neglect others. The emotional drive to feel good, to be happy, often outweighs the empathy or concern we might feel for someone else's struggles or needs. It's not that people are inherently selfish, it's that the pursuit of happiness is deeply ingrained in us. In a world where fulfillment is often tied to personal achievement, status, or material success, we are conditioned to place our needs at the center of our lives. The pressure to be happy, to feel accomplished, or to be comfortable can sometimes blind us to the impact our actions have on others. This can lead to situations where people, knowingly or unknowingly, exploit others, make decisions that benefit themselves at the expense of others, or simply overlook the struggles of those around them. The chilling reality is that when it comes down to it, many are willing to sacrifice someone else's well-being, whether in relationships, work, or life, to ensure their own happiness. Authority figures are followed blindly. Humans have a disturbing tendency to follow authority figures without question. This behavior is deeply embedded in our psychology, rooted in a survival instinct that values structure and leadership. From childhood, we're conditioned to respect authority, whether it's parents, teachers, or later bosses and politicians. This conditioning often leads to blind obedience, where the figure of authority is trusted unquestioningly, regardless of their actions or intentions. In moments of uncertainty or crisis, We instinctively look for someone to lead, and once that leader is identified, we follow, often surrendering our own judgment. This phenomenon isn't limited to obvious figures of power like dictators or military leaders. It can manifest in everyday life, at work, in social groups, or even in family dynamics. People often overlook or justify unethical decisions if they come from a trusted authority. The shocking truth is that the mere presence of authority can override an individual's moral compass, making them more likely to engage in behavior they would never consider on their own. This blind obedience is dangerous. It has been the driving force behind atrocities throughout history, where people, believing they were following orders, committed acts of cruelty and injustice. The chilling part of this truth is how easily we can be manipulated. When we surrender our critical thinking to an authority, we risk losing our sense of responsibility and moral integrity. In a world that values hierarchy, the brutal reality is that we often follow without questioning the consequences. Power imbalances lead to abuse. When power is concentrated in the hands of a few, the dynamics of control shift dramatically, often giving rise to abuse. Whether in personal relationships, workplaces, or larger societal structures, the imbalance of power creates a fertile ground for exploitation. The one who holds power can manipulate, dominate, and even harm those who are weaker, often without facing immediate consequences. This happens because the person in control is able to dictate the terms of the relationship, shaping the environment in ways that serve their interests while stripping others of agency. The disturbing reality is that power has the ability to corrupt, and when individuals feel untouchable, free from scrutiny or accountability, they often abuse their position. This can manifest in overtly harmful ways, like physical or emotional abuse, but it can also take more subtle forms, like manipulation or coercion. Those who are subjected to this abuse often feel powerless to fight back, either due to fear, dependency, or the systematic nature of the imbalance. This cycle of abuse isn't always visible, but its impact is deep and lasting. Over time, those who are abused internalize their subjugation, often accepting mistreatment as their reality. The darker truth is that power imbalances don't just lead to occasional abuse. They perpetuate systems of oppression and inequality, making them all the more insidious and difficult to break. The more we have, the less we appreciate it. There's a deeply unsettling truth embedded in human nature. As we accumulate more, whether it's wealth, possessions, or success, our ability to appreciate it diminishes. This paradoxical tendency is a result of the hedonic treadmill, a concept in psychology that explains how we adapt to improvements in our lives. When we acquire something new or reach a milestone, there's an initial rush of excitement, but over time, that excitement fades, and we begin to take it for granted. What once felt extraordinary becomes ordinary, and our desire shifts to something newer, bigger, or better. This constant need for more stems from our evolutionary instincts to seek novelty and improvement. While this drive helped our ancestors survive by constantly adapting to their environment, it now manifests as a constant craving for more possessions or achievements, regardless of how much we already have. The more we accumulate, the more we shift our focus to the next thing, leaving little room to savor what we've already achieved. The result is a perpetual cycle of dissatisfaction. As we acquire more, our sense of fulfillment erodes, and we're left feeling empty despite outward success. The more we have, the more we become conditioned to believe that happiness is just out of reach, forever dependent on the next acquisition, the next accomplishment. It's a cruel reminder that true contentment isn't found in possessions or status, but in the ability to truly appreciate what we already have. People judge by appearance. It's an uncomfortable reality, but people often judge others based on their appearance, far more than they realize or admit. From the way we dress to our body language and even our facial expressions, The judgments people make about us begin long before we've said a word. This immediate, often subconscious, evaluation happens because the human brain is wired to make quick decisions, a survival mechanism honed over thousands of years. In a split second, we assess someone's trustworthiness, intelligence, or social status, all based on how they look. While this tendency has evolutionary roots, helping us quickly determine friend from foe, it manifests in ways that are harmful and unfair in modern society. We judge someone's value or capabilities based on superficial qualities, like their clothes, hairstyle, or even skin color. This snap judgment process often leaves little room for the deeper qualities that define a person. It's easier to form an opinion based on what we see than to take the time to understand someone's true character or struggles. This tendency can lead to bias, prejudice, and discrimination, as we assign worth and merit based on external factors rather than the internal qualities that matter most. People who do not fit societal standards of beauty or success often find themselves unfairly judged or dismissed. The painful truth is that no matter how much we try to resist, first impressions often shape our perceptions of others, creating invisible barriers between individuals. In a world so focused on appearance, it's easy to forget that true worth lies beneath the surface. Group identity fosters conflict. Human beings have an innate desire to belong, and group identity is one of the strongest ways we define ourselves. Whether it's nationality, religion, political affiliation, or even sports fandom, groups give us a sense of purpose and solidarity. However, the very nature of group identity can sow the seeds of conflict. When we identify strongly with one group, we often see the world in terms of us versus them. This division creates an invisible barrier, turning those outside of our group into perceived threats, competitors, or enemies. The more invested we become in our group's values and beliefs, the more likely we are to view others who don't share those values as inferior, misguided, or even dangerous. This leads to polarization, where the focus shifts from understanding and cooperation to defending the group and its interests. As group identity strengthens, empathy for those outside the group weakens. Instead of seeing people as individuals with unique experiences, we reduce them to labels based on their group affiliation, whether it's political party, race, or religion. This phenomenon can escalate quickly into conflict. History is full of examples where group identity has fueled violence, war, and division, from religious crusades to modern-day political polarization. Even within society, smaller-scale conflicts arise daily because people are unwilling to consider viewpoints that differ from their group's norms. The chilling reality is that group identity can turn peaceful, diverse societies into hostile environments where understanding and cooperation are replaced by division and distrust. Generosity is often transactional. At first glance, generosity may seem like an act of pure selflessness, but more often than not, it's transactional in nature. Beneath the surface of giving, there's frequently an unspoken expectation of something in return, whether it's the desire for recognition, affection, or even a sense of moral superiority. Many acts of generosity are driven by personal gain. The human need to feel valued or validated often intertwines with our desire to help others. We give not purely out of kindness, but with the subtle hope that our generosity will be acknowledged and reciprocated in some form. This transactional nature of generosity can be seen in everyday interactions. A person might donate to charity, but also feel the need to share that donation publicly to gain social approval. Similarly, people often give gifts or offer help with the expectation that the favor will be returned when needed. The problem arises when this hidden agenda turns generosity into a form of investment, where the giver expects something in return, not necessarily material but emotional or social benefits. The darker side of this transactional generosity is that it can lead to disappointment, resentment, and manipulation when the return doesn't come as expected. Instead of fostering genuine connections, people can start to view their actions through a lens of, what's in it for me? This dynamic often strips generosity of its purity and turns it into a strategic move to gain favor or status. In reality, true selflessness is rare because for most of us, giving is inherently tied to some form of personal reward, whether we are conscious of it or not. Sacrifice for others is rare. The truth is, genuine sacrifice for others is far rarer than we would like to admit. In a world that constantly promotes self-interest and individual success, putting someone else's needs ahead of our own often feels like a rare and extraordinary act. While many claim to value selflessness, when it comes down to it, personal comfort, safety, and goals tend to take priority. Sacrificing for others means putting your own desires and well-being at risk, and for many, that's a daunting prospect. Humans are naturally wired to seek self-preservation, and this instinct extends to everyday choices, whether it's giving up personal time to help a stranger, sacrificing career advancement to support a loved one, or facing discomfort for the sake of someone else's happiness. These acts require an emotional and physical toll. The willingness to make such sacrifices is often tested by the depth of the relationship or the perceived reward for doing so. People are far more likely to sacrifice for those they care deeply about, but even then, the line between selflessness and selfishness can blur when personal costs become too high. The sad reality is that in today's fast-paced, competitive world, many are hesitant to give up their own opportunities or resources. It's easier to justify looking out for oneself than to put someone else's needs ahead of one's own. True sacrifice requires vulnerability, compassion, and the recognition that others' well-being matters just as much, if not more, than our own. Yet, in a society where personal gain is often the ultimate goal, this kind of selflessness is becoming increasingly rare. Empathy is strongest for similar people. At the core of human connection lies a powerful but often troubling truth. Empathy is most readily extended to those who are similar to us, whether in terms of appearance, values, background, or experiences. We naturally feel a deeper sense of understanding and compassion for those who mirror our own lives. It's an instinctive reaction, driven by the comfort of familiarity. When we see someone who reflects our own experiences or identity, our brains are more likely to resonate with their pain, joy, or struggles. We're more likely to help, listen, and connect when the person in need feels like one of us. This inclination has roots in evolution, where it was advantageous to help those within our close-knit social circles. Helping those who were similar, such as family members, friends, or tribe members, was vital for survival. However, in modern society, this deep-seated bias can become a barrier to true universal empathy. We often overlook or dismiss the struggles of those who are different from us, whether due to race, culture, or socioeconomic status. The painful reality is that empathy can become a tool of exclusion rather than inclusion. When we fail to empathize with those who are not like us, we perpetuate divisions and foster misunderstanding. We might feel sympathy for a friend's hardship, but turn a blind eye to the same suffering in someone we view as different. This human tendency traps us in our comfort zones, limiting our ability to truly connect across divides. The truth is, empathy is most easily sparked by similarity, but true compassion should transcend those boundaries. People exaggerate others' faults while minimizing their own. One of the most pervasive and insidious traits of human nature is the tendency to magnify the flaws of others while downplaying our own. This behavior is rooted in our need to protect our self-image and maintain a sense of superiority. When we criticize others, we elevate ourselves, at least in our own minds, by pointing out their mistakes or imperfections. It's easier to focus on someone else's faults because it deflects attention from our own. This is especially true in situations where we feel insecure or threatened. By exaggerating the mistakes of others, we create a sense of moral distance, making it easier to feel justified in our actions or decisions. On the flip side, we are quick to minimize our own shortcomings. We rationalize our behavior, offering excuses or justifications that make our actions seem more acceptable, even if they are equally wrong or harmful. This self-serving bias is a psychological defense mechanism, allowing us to avoid feelings of guilt or shame. By diminishing the significance of our mistakes, we protect our ego from the discomfort of self-criticism. This pattern distorts our perception of reality. It prevents growth by hindering self-awareness and accountability, as we are less likely to reflect on our own flaws when we're too busy criticizing others. Ultimately, this habit fosters resentment and division, as it reinforces the idea that we are always right and others are always to blame. The uncomfortable truth is that in our pursuit of self-preservation, we often fail to recognize that we, too, are deeply flawed. Harmful behaviors are justified by higher causes. One of the most disturbing aspects of human nature is the tendency to justify harmful actions by claiming they are for a greater good. Whether it's in war, politics, or even everyday life, people often convince themselves that their harmful behavior is necessary for a noble cause. This rationalization allows individuals to commit atrocities or engage in morally questionable actions without confronting their own guilt or hypocrisy. The belief that the ends justify the means gives people a way to avoid the emotional and ethical discomfort of recognizing their wrongdoings. This mindset can be seen in countless historical events where people have rationalized violence, oppression, or cruelty in the name of a higher purpose. Leaders have sent others to war, claiming it's for national security, freedom, or justice, while ignoring the devastating consequences of these actions on innocent lives. On a smaller scale, individuals might justify lying, cheating, or manipulating others to protect their job, reputation, or personal interests, telling themselves that it's all for a good reason. The danger of this justification is that it often blinds people to the harm they are causing. It allows them to compartmentalize their actions, convincing themselves that they are still good or moral because their intentions are pure. This moral distortion is one of the most effective ways humans can engage in cruelty and exploitation without facing the full weight of their conscience. The terrifying truth is that when we believe our cause is righteous enough, we can convince ourselves to do almost anything, no matter how harmful it may be to others. Empathy is limited to those we relate to. Empathy, the ability to understand and share the feelings of another, is often not as universal as we like to believe. The truth is, empathy is naturally limited to those we can relate to, those who share similar experiences, values, or backgrounds. When we encounter someone whose life is radically different from our own, it becomes harder to truly understand their struggles or emotions. We might feel sympathy or pity, but true, deep empathy requires a personal connection, something that allows us to see the world through their eyes. This limitation is rooted in human psychology. We're more likely to empathize with people who resemble us in some way, whether it's shared cultural backgrounds, similar experiences, or even comparable emotions. The closer someone's experience aligns with our own, the easier it is for us to connect with their feelings. Conversely, when someone's situation is so foreign or extreme, it becomes difficult to bridge the emotional gap, leaving us unable or unwilling to relate. This is why we often see divisions in society. People gravitate toward others who are similar to them, and those who are different are marginalized or misunderstood. It's why, despite good intentions, many can struggle to empathize with issues they have never experienced personally, whether it's poverty, discrimination, or grief. The harsh reality is that our capacity for empathy is deeply shaped by how much we can personally relate to someone's experience. And as long as we stay within our own comfort zones, our ability to connect with others in meaningful ways remains limited. Most act for personal gain, not for others. At the heart of human behavior lies an undeniable truth. Most of what we do is driven by self-interest, even when it appears to be for the benefit of others. Whether in personal relationships, the workplace, or society at large, humans are wired to make choices that ultimately serve their own needs, desires, or ambitions. This doesn't necessarily mean malicious intent. It's simply how the brain is conditioned to work. The instinct to improve one's own situation, secure personal happiness, or ensure survival often trumps altruistic actions. We may think we are helping others out of kindness or duty, but more often than not, there is something in it for us. We help friends because it strengthens our social bonds. We donate to charity because it boosts our self-esteem or provides a sense of purpose. Even in acts of kindness, there is frequently an underlying benefit for ourselves, whether emotional, social, or financial. Humans often mask these self-serving motives under the guise of altruism, making it difficult to distinguish genuine selflessness from behavior that, at its core, is about personal gain. This self-interest-driven behavior shapes our choices in ways we might not even be conscious of. It's why we may appear supportive or helpful, but still expect something in return, whether it's gratitude, recognition, or an eventual favor. The painful truth is that, despite our best intentions, most actions are still fueled by a deep-rooted desire for personal benefit, making true selflessness an exception rather than the rule. People resist changing incorrect beliefs. One of the most stubborn aspects of human nature is our resistance to changing incorrect beliefs, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. Once a belief becomes entrenched, it's remarkably difficult to let go of, regardless of how inaccurate or damaging it might be. This resistance is deeply tied to our identity. Beliefs aren't just abstract ideas, they are part of who we are. To challenge a belief is often perceived as an attack on our sense of self, which is why we instinctively defend them even when they are clearly wrong. This phenomenon is driven by cognitive dissonance, the uncomfortable tension we feel when faced with information that contradicts our beliefs. Rather than confronting that discomfort and updating our worldview, most people will reject, dismiss, or rationalize away the new information to preserve their existing beliefs. It's easier to maintain the familiar even when it's flawed than to confront the anxiety and confusion that comes with embracing something new. This is why people continue to hold on to false beliefs about politics, health, or science, despite evidence to the contrary. This resistance to change isn't a sign of intelligence or a lack of access to information. It's a deeply ingrained psychological barrier. It keeps us in our comfort zones, trapping us in outdated thinking and hindering personal and societal growth. The uncomfortable truth is that the more we dig in our heels, the harder it becomes to see the world as it truly is, and the more we perpetuate ignorance and division. Familiarity breeds resistance to improvement. There is a subtle but powerful truth in human nature. The more familiar something becomes, the more resistant we are to changing it, even if it's holding us back. When we become comfortable with our routines, beliefs, or environments, the very familiarity that once made them comforting becomes an obstacle to growth. We settle into patterns because they're safe, predictable, and require no effort. But this comfort can turn into stagnation, preventing us from seeing opportunities for improvement or pushing ourselves beyond what we already know. This resistance to change often emerges in all areas of life, from personal habits to societal structures. People are more likely to reject new ideas or innovations simply because they challenge what has been familiar and reliable. In relationships, we may become complacent with old patterns of communication, even when they're no longer serving us well. At work, employees might resist new technology or processes because the old way feels easier, even though it's less efficient. The truth is that familiarity creates a mental barrier. We associate change with discomfort, and this psychological resistance makes it easier to stay stuck than to adapt or improve. This fear of the unknown often outweighs the potential benefits of growth, and as a result, we become blind to possibilities that could make our lives or society better. The ironic part is that the very familiarity that offers comfort today can prevent the breakthroughs and transformations we desperately need tomorrow. Fear of loss outweighs desire for gain. When it comes to decision-making, humans are wired to fear loss more intensely than the prospect of gaining something. This psychological phenomenon, known as loss aversion, is deeply embedded in our brains. It explains why we tend to make conservative, risk-averse choices even when the potential rewards are high. The fear of losing what we already have, whether it's money, status, or relationships, often outweighs the allure of gaining something new. This instinct was vital for survival in our evolutionary past, where the stakes of losing resources could mean life or death. But in the modern world, this primal fear continues to govern much of our behavior. Loss aversion can be seen in countless everyday situations. People are more likely to hold on to a job they dislike, simply because they fear the uncertainty of a new one. They may stay in toxic relationships, reluctant to risk the emotional loss of ending them. Even in financial matters, people are often more focused on avoiding losses than on maximizing potential gains. This is why investors, for example, will often hold on to losing stocks, unwilling to cut their losses and move forward, despite the chance to invest elsewhere with a higher return. This fear of loss often paralyzes individuals, keeping them stuck in situations that aren't beneficial, simply to avoid the perceived pain of losing what they have. It is a force that limits growth, innovation, and change. When the fear of losing outweighs the excitement of gaining, it keeps us rooted in the familiar, even if it means sacrificing potential for something better. Impunity fosters aggression. When individuals are shielded from the consequences of their actions, aggression can flourish. Impunity, the absence of accountability or punishment, creates an environment where harmful behavior is not only allowed but often encouraged. Without the fear of retribution or repercussions, people are more likely to act aggressively, taking advantage of their freedom to hurt, manipulate, or exploit others. It's a dangerous psychological shift. When there are no consequences for one's actions, moral boundaries become blurred, and the restraint that normally prevents us from crossing certain lines starts to erode. This phenomenon can be seen in various aspects of society, from the actions of corrupt leaders who commit atrocities without facing justice, to the behavior of individuals online, where anonymity fosters bullying and trolling. When the consequences of aggressive or harmful actions are removed, people feel emboldened to act on their basest impulses. In some cases, aggression becomes a tool of power, used to maintain control or intimidate others without fear of retribution. The sad reality is that impunity creates a toxic cycle. Those who act aggressively without consequence become more brazen in their actions, while their victims feel helpless and powerless. This unchecked behavior can spiral, leading to greater social unrest, violence, and conflict. When people are not held accountable for their actions, aggression becomes not just a defense mechanism, but a dominant force that shapes behavior, ultimately weakening societal trust and safety. Rules are often ignored if unpunished. Human nature reveals a troubling truth. When rules are not enforced, they are often disregarded. The idea of following rules for the sake of morality or fairness can quickly lose its power when there's no immediate consequence for breaking them. Without the threat of punishment or accountability, people are more likely to bend or completely ignore the rules, especially if doing so benefits them in some way. This is why laws, social norms, and ethical guidelines can fall apart in environments where oversight is weak or non-existent. The desire to avoid discomfort or gain personal advantage often outweighs the fear of getting caught. In situations where the risk of being punished is low, individuals might justify their actions or rationalize that their rule breaking is harmless. For example, in traffic, people may speed when there are no cops around, or in the workplace, employees may take shortcuts if they know no one is monitoring them. This behavior is driven by the human tendency to avoid effort or discomfort, seeking immediate gratification without considering long-term consequences. The disturbing reality is that when rules go unpunished, they lose their power to maintain order. People stop following them out of respect or fairness and start seeing them as mere suggestions. This can erode trust, create chaos, and ultimately lead to a breakdown in societal structures. The truth is, without consequences, human beings often choose to do what benefits them most, revealing how fragile the adherence to rules can be when there's no accountability. Bias confirmation fuels belief in falsehoods. At the heart of human psychology lies a dangerous tendency, the confirmation bias. This psychological phenomenon drives us to seek out information that supports our existing beliefs, while disregarding or dismissing anything that contradicts them. The result is a distorted view of reality, where falsehoods can be embraced and truth is ignored simply because it doesn't fit with what we already want to believe. This bias is so powerful because it's not just about actively ignoring facts. It's about creating a sense of validation and comfort in our own worldview, regardless of how flawed or incorrect it may be. People often surround themselves with like-minded individuals, consuming media and seeking out opinions that align with their preconceived notions. Social media algorithms exploit this bias, feeding us content that reinforces what we already think, trapping us in echo chambers. In these spaces, falsehoods thrive, spreading unchecked because people are more likely to accept them when they confirm their beliefs. Whether it's misinformation about politics, health, or science, the need to feel validated makes us susceptible to believing things that simply aren't true. The problem with confirmation bias is that it's self-perpetuating. The more we cling to falsehoods, the more we reinforce them, creating a vicious cycle of ignorance. This doesn't just impact individuals, it affects societies, leading to division, mistrust, and a collective rejection of objective truth. When the truth becomes inconvenient, the human tendency is to twist reality to fit our desires, leaving us trapped in a world of self-deception. Pets are treated better than humans. There's a disturbing truth about how we treat the creatures we love most. Pets often receive more care, attention, and affection than many human beings do. The reality is that in many households, pets are treated like royalty, with comfortable living spaces, gourmet food, and lavish care. They receive regular checkups, emotional attention, and sometimes even more love than family members. In contrast, many people, especially those in need, lack the same basic level of attention or support, even from their closest friends or family. This disparity highlights a strange yet undeniable aspect of human nature, the capacity to prioritize the needs of animals over those of fellow humans. The bond people form with their pets is unique. Pets offer unconditional love, emotional support, and companionship. In return, they often receive lavish care. But when it comes to human relationships, we often fail to show the same level of compassion or effort, especially for those who might be struggling, isolated, or less fortunate. Society tends to be more forgiving toward animals, offering them the benefit of the doubt, while humans often fall short in supporting each other emotionally or financially. This imbalance raises questions about where our priorities truly lie. Why is it that we can shower a pet with attention, yet fail to extend the same compassion to those who need it most. The unsettling truth is that pets often occupy a unique place in our lives that humans, no matter how much they may be loved, sometimes do not. Loyalty to groups often supports harmful actions. Loyalty to a group, whether it's family, friends, political parties, or even nations, can be a powerful force, but it also has a darker side. When individuals place their loyalty above all else, they often turn a blind eye to harmful actions within their group, justifying behavior that they would otherwise condemn. The bond of loyalty creates an emotional attachment, making it difficult to question or challenge the group's behavior, even when it's ethically or morally wrong. This sense of belonging fosters a us versus them mentality, where the needs and well-being of the group are prioritized over the rights or suffering of outsiders or even members within the group. This loyalty can lead to destructive outcomes, as individuals are willing to overlook or defend actions such as violence, discrimination, or exploitation in the name of protecting their group. In extreme cases, it can even lead to blind obedience, where people follow harmful orders or engage in unethical behavior simply to stay in good standing with the group. It's why cults, gangs, and even military organizations can perpetuate violence and injustice. Loyalty to the group overrides moral questioning. The uncomfortable truth is that while loyalty can strengthen bonds and create a sense of unity, it also enables harmful behavior when left unchecked. People will often defend or perpetuate the wrongdoings of their group, not because they inherently agree with those actions, but because their loyalty clouds their judgment. This blind allegiance fosters an environment where harmful behavior is allowed to thrive and the moral compass of individuals is compromised. The status quo is maintained despite harm. One of the most unsettling truths about human nature is our tendency to cling to the status quo, even when it causes harm. People often resist change, even when it's clear that the current situation is damaging or unsustainable. This attachment to familiarity is driven by fear of the unknown, fear of uncertainty, and fear of losing control. The discomfort of change, no matter how necessary, often feels more threatening than enduring a harmful status quo. Whether in relationships, workplaces, or entire societies, the fear of disruption can keep people from addressing problems that are staring them in the face. This resistance to change is especially strong when the existing system benefits certain individuals or groups. Those who hold power, wealth, or privilege within the status quo are often the most resistant to altering it, even if it's hurting others. The status quo becomes a comforting shield, protecting the interests of those in power, while the majority suffers quietly, too afraid or disillusioned to demand change. Even when faced with mounting evidence of harm, whether it's environmental destruction, inequality, or systemic injustice, many people continue to uphold the current order because the alternative feels too uncertain or destabilizing. The chilling truth is that the human tendency to preserve what is familiar, even at great cost, often prevents progress. It keeps people trapped in cycles of suffering, unable to break free because the fear of what lies beyond the known is too great. This attachment to the status quo, despite its harm, highlights the immense psychological barrier that stands in the way of meaningful change. Morality is often ignored unless personally benefiting. At the core of human behavior lies a disconcerting truth. Morality is frequently set aside when it doesn't serve our immediate interests. While many people like to think of themselves as ethical, the reality is that in situations where personal gain is at stake, the temptation to disregard moral considerations can be overwhelming. When there's a direct benefit, whether it's money, power, or security, humans have a tendency to rationalize actions that would normally be considered wrong. This ability to justify unethical behavior is both a survival mechanism and a weakness, as it allows individuals to ignore the discomfort of doing something immoral as long as they benefit. This phenomenon is evident in everyday decisions. People may cheat on tests, lie on resumes, or exploit others in business, all while convincing themselves that it's necessary or justified. The pressure to succeed or the fear of failure often leads people to compromise their values. In these moments, morality becomes a luxury, something to be adhered to only when it's convenient or when there's no personal risk involved. The darker side of this behavior is that, when left unchecked, it fosters a culture of dishonesty and exploitation. When people act with little regard for morality, it not only harms others, but also erodes trust and integrity within communities. The painful truth is that moral principles are often only upheld when there's nothing to lose, and when the stakes are high, people are all too willing to abandon them for personal gain. In-group loyalty leads to tribalism. Humans are naturally drawn to groups, and the loyalty we feel toward our in-groups, the people who share our beliefs, values, or backgrounds, can be incredibly powerful. This loyalty, however, can also give rise to tribalism, a phenomenon where group identity becomes so central that it leads to the exclusion and even demonization of those who are perceived as outsiders. The need to protect and promote the interests of one's own group can easily spiral into division, creating us versus them mentalities that foster conflict and deepen societal divides. At its core, in-group loyalty is meant to strengthen bonds and create a sense of belonging. It provides emotional support, a shared purpose, and a sense of security. But when that loyalty becomes rigid, it encourages a mentality where the in-group's success or survival is prioritized at the expense of others. This can lead to harmful stereotypes, prejudice, and even violence against people who are seen as different or threatening. Tribalism can be observed in everything from politics to sports, where loyalty to a particular side can blind individuals to reason and empathy for those on the other side. The problem is that tribalism doesn't just create division, it dehumanizes those outside the group. People who might otherwise be allies or simply different in their beliefs become the enemy. In this way, in-group loyalty, which could be a positive force, can turn into a force for harm, creating barriers that prevent cooperation and understanding between different groups. Self-blame is minimized in favor of blaming others. When things go wrong, humans have an instinctive tendency to deflect responsibility. Self-blame feels uncomfortable, challenging our self-image and forcing us to confront our flaws and mistakes. It's much easier, less painful, to shift the blame onto others. This tendency to avoid owning up to our own faults allows us to protect our ego and maintain a sense of control, even when we know, deep down, that we are partly responsible. Blaming others offers a quick psychological fix, shielding us from guilt and the emotional discomfort of accepting our role in a situation. This behavior is seen everywhere, from everyday arguments to corporate scandals or political failures. It's why, in heated debates or conflicts, people are more likely to accuse others of being at fault than to consider how their own actions might have contributed. The mind does this because self-blame brings with it a heavy emotional burden. It forces introspection, discomfort, and sometimes the need for change, which many are unwilling to face. The painful truth is that shifting blame can lead to toxic environments, both in personal relationships and within larger systems. When no one takes responsibility, problems remain unsolved and growth is stunted. By constantly minimizing self-blame and pointing fingers, we deny ourselves the opportunity to learn from our mistakes. Ultimately, this self-justification prevents us from evolving, leaving us stuck in cycles of denial and conflict. Competition is natural, cooperation is rare. At the core of human nature lies an instinct that has shaped our survival for centuries: competition. From an evolutionary standpoint, competing for resources, mates, and status was essential for survival. This deeply ingrained drive is hardwired into our psychology, and it often manifests in every aspect of life, whether in the workplace, social circles, or even family dynamics. Humans are naturally inclined to see others as rivals, driven by the belief that success, resources, and recognition are finite and must be fought for. Cooperation, on the other hand, is far less common. While it can be advantageous, it requires trust, selflessness, and the willingness to put the group's needs above individual desires. These qualities are difficult to sustain, especially in a world that prizes personal achievement and success. People often view cooperation as a means to an end, rather than a fundamental aspect of human interaction. It requires vulnerability, and the reality is that many are unwilling to risk their own interests for the sake of collaboration, especially when competition offers a clearer, more immediate path to success. The unfortunate truth is that competition often feels more natural because it's driven by basic survival instincts, hunger for success and recognition. It's easier to compete than to cooperate because competition validates our worth, while cooperation requires a balance that many aren't ready to strike. While cooperation is possible, it's rare, and in a world where individual success is often prioritized over collective gain, competition continues to dominate human behavior. Harsh judgments are reserved for others. One of the most uncomfortable truths about human nature is the tendency to judge others more harshly than we judge ourselves. It's easy to point fingers, criticize, and condemn the actions or mistakes of others, especially when those individuals are different from us or when we don't fully understand their circumstances. The truth is, humans often hold others to higher standards than we hold ourselves, overlooking our own flaws and justifying our mistakes. When we observe someone else's behavior, it's easy to label them, to assume the worst, and to believe that we would never act the same way. But when it comes to our own actions, we tend to soften our judgment, explaining away our shortcomings with excuses, justifications, or a focus on intent rather than impact. This tendency to judge others harshly is a defense mechanism. It helps us feel superior, or at least safe from the discomfort of confronting our own flaws. By focusing on the perceived faults of others, we avoid the difficult task of examining our own behavior or challenging our beliefs. It's also tied to the idea of moral superiority, where we convince ourselves that we are better, more ethical, or more capable than those around us. The truth is, we all have biases, blind spots, and imperfections, but the harshness with which we judge others reveals how often we fail to recognize our shared humanity and the complexities that drive people's actions. Envy drives destructive behavior. Envy is one of the most corrosive emotions in human nature. It's the feeling that arises when we perceive others as having something we lack, whether it's success, beauty, wealth, or happiness, and the painful desire to possess it for ourselves. But envy doesn't just sting, it often drives destructive behavior, both toward the object of our envy and toward ourselves. Instead of simply admiring what others have, we can become consumed by a need to tear them down or undermine their success to make ourselves feel better. This destructive force is often rooted in insecurity and a lack of self-worth. When we envy someone, we are essentially admitting to ourselves that we feel inadequate in comparison. This can lead to resentment and negative actions, from subtle sabotage to overt hostility. Envy can poison relationships, turning friends into rivals or even driving wedges between family members. Rather than fostering growth or motivation, envy often breeds bitterness, making us focus more on what others have than on our own potential or achievements. The truly insidious nature of envy is that it doesn't just hurt the person being envied, it hurts the person experiencing it. The energy spent resenting someone else's success is energy wasted, preventing us from focusing on our own goals and happiness. In the end, envy often leads to self-destruction, as it keeps us trapped in a cycle of comparison, frustration, and negativity. Instead of using the success of others as inspiration, envy pushes us toward a dark path that can harm our own progress and happiness. Social pressure overrides moral behavior. In the face of social pressure, even the most deeply held moral beliefs can crumble. Humans are inherently social creatures, and our need for acceptance and belonging can be so strong that we are willing to compromise our values to fit in or avoid conflict. Whether it's a group of friends, co-workers, or a broader societal norm, the pressure to conform can be overwhelming, leading us to act in ways that contradict our own ethics or sense of right and wrong. The fear of being ostracized or judged for standing apart from the group can push us to abandon our principles in favor of social approval. This dynamic plays out in countless situations, from peer pressure in adolescence to the subtle yet pervasive influence of corporate or political cultures that demand conformity. People often make decisions they know are wrong simply because they are afraid to go against the majority, even if it means betraying their own moral compass. The chilling reality is that many of our most harmful societal norms and injustices have thrived because individuals chose to ignore their own ethics to avoid standing out. Social pressure can be so powerful that it blinds us to the moral consequences of our actions. We may engage in unethical behavior, justify harmful actions, or ignore injustices simply to fit in or gain approval. The painful truth is that in moments of conformity, our morality often takes a backseat to the desire for acceptance. This leads to a cycle where moral behavior is often sidelined, and society collectively tolerates behaviors that would otherwise be unthinkable. Negative news is more impactful than positive. Human nature is wired to react more strongly to negative events than to positive ones. This is known as the negativity bias, a psychological phenomenon where bad news or negative experiences have a much greater impact on our emotions and decision-making than positive ones. This bias evolved as a survival mechanism. Our ancestors needed to pay close attention to potential threats in their environment to stay alive. As a result, negative stimuli, such as danger, harm, or betrayal, triggered stronger emotional responses, helping people react quickly and protect themselves. Today, this instinct still influences how we process information. Negative news, whether it's about a tragedy, scandal, or disaster, grabs our attention in ways that positive news often can't. We spend more time talking about bad news, dwelling on it, and letting it affect our mood. This heightened response to negativity can lead to feelings of anxiety, fear, and helplessness, even when the threats are distant or unlikely to impact us directly. The media and social networks understand this well, often prioritizing sensational or distressing stories because they generate more engagement and reactions. The troubling reality is that this bias distorts our perception of the world. We become so focused on the negative that it overshadows the positive events in our lives, reinforcing feelings of pessimism and hopelessness. While good news is often fleeting or underreported, the weight of negative news lingers, shaping our worldview in ways that leave us anxious and disconnected from the more hopeful aspects of life. Anger is stronger when wronged than when we wrong others. There's a deeply ingrained aspect of human nature that makes us feel intense anger when we are wronged, yet we often feel little to no anger when we ourselves are the ones causing harm. When someone hurts us, whether through betrayal, dishonesty, or a simple injustice, the emotional response is immediate, raw, and powerful. The sense of being wronged triggers a deep sense of unfairness and violation, often causing an explosive reaction that can cloud our judgment. On the other hand, when we are the ones at fault, we are more likely to rationalize our actions minimize their impact, or even deny their harm altogether. Instead of anger, we often experience guilt or defensiveness, emotions that are less intense and less outwardly expressive. The reason anger is stronger when we are wronged lies in the way our brains process perceived injustice. Being harmed threatens our sense of security and fairness, triggering a primal response to defend ourselves and restore balance. However, when we wrong others, the cognitive dissonance between our actions and our self-image often leads us to justify the behavior, allowing us to avoid confronting the deeper emotional impact of our wrongdoings. This imbalance can lead to destructive cycles of resentment, conflict, and even violence. The truth is, we are often more motivated by the pain inflicted on us than by the pain we cause others, and until we recognize this, we remain trapped in a pattern of emotional reactivity, blind to the harm we may be perpetuating. Crisis reveals selfishness. In times of crisis, when stress and fear heighten, human nature often shifts towards self-preservation, and the harsh reality emerges. Crisis exposes the deep-rooted selfishness that lies within many of us. In moments of extreme pressure, whether in a natural disaster, financial collapse, or personal emergency, people are quick to prioritize their own survival, safety, and well-being above all else. This instinct is primal, yet the consequences can be devastating for others. When faced with a crisis, the protective urge to ensure one's own security can trump all other concerns, often leading to decisions that harm or disregard the needs of others. People hoard resources, cut ties with those who are vulnerable, and act out of fear rather than compassion. The myth of human unity in times of trouble is often shattered when individuals or groups hoard supplies, shut out help for others, or abandon those they once cared for. The fear of losing what we have, whether it's material goods or personal safety, magnifies selfish tendencies and distorts our ability to act altruistically. While some rise to the occasion and show remarkable generosity or courage, the darker side of human nature often emerges in crisis. The frantic scramble for personal gain can overshadow moral compasses, making us blind to the pain of others. When the veneer of societal norms fades, the raw instinct for self-preservation takes hold, and the harsh truth is revealed. In a crisis, many will act in ways that prioritize themselves over the collective good. Habits guide actions, even when harmful. Human behavior is largely governed by habits which, once formed, operate on autopilot. These routines and patterns, while often serving us well in terms of efficiency and comfort, can also trap us in cycles of self-destructive behavior. The problem lies in the fact that habits are so ingrained that they often occur without conscious thought. Whether it's unhealthy eating, procrastination, or toxic relationships, people frequently continue actions that are clearly harmful simply because they've become habitual. The brain prefers familiarity, so even when these habits cause harm, the mind gravitates toward them because they provide a sense of comfort and predictability. This is why people struggle to break bad habits, even when they understand the consequences. It's not that they lack the willpower to change, it's that their brain has become wired to follow these routines. The neural pathways that reinforce habitual actions become stronger with repetition, making it harder to form new, healthier behaviors. In some cases, these harmful habits are so deeply embedded that the individual may fail to recognize how much damage they're causing to themselves or others. The painful reality is that even when people know better, their habits often dictate their actions. The struggle to break free from these cycles is real, as they offer immediate gratification, comfort, or a sense of control, no matter how detrimental they may be in the long run. Habits can lock us in patterns of behavior that limit our potential and perpetuate harm, even when we are aware of the damage being done. Blind obedience supports injustice. One of the most disturbing truths about human nature is our tendency to obey authority without question, even when it leads to unethical or unjust outcomes. This blind obedience is deeply ingrained in us, a product of both social conditioning and evolutionary instincts. From an early age, we are taught to respect authority, parents, teachers, bosses, government officials, and to follow rules without challenge. The result is that many people, when placed in positions where authority figures make decisions, are willing to go along with actions that are morally wrong, simply because they are told to do so. The infamous Milgram experiments in the 1960s demonstrated just how far people would go in obeying authority, even when it meant inflicting pain on others. Many participants were willing to administer what they believed were harmful electric shocks to others, simply because an authority figure told them to. This willingness to follow orders, regardless of the consequences, reveals a terrifying aspect of human behavior. When we are detached from the consequences of our actions and shielded by authority, we lose our moral compass. The reality is that blind obedience fosters systems of injustice. It allows oppressive regimes, corrupt leaders, and harmful institutions to thrive as people are too afraid, unwilling, or conditioned to challenge them. This is why injustices, whether on a small scale like workplace exploitation or on a global scale like war crimes, are perpetuated because individuals defer their responsibility to those in power. The harsh truth is that by blindly obeying authority, we often become complicit in the very injustices we would otherwise condemn. Familiarity trumps fairness. When it comes to making decisions, humans often prioritize familiarity over fairness, even when it's morally or ethically wrong. This powerful bias means that we're more likely to favor those we know, trust, or feel comfortable with, regardless of whether it's the right thing to do. It's a tendency that plays out in countless aspects of life, from hiring practices to social interactions. We are more inclined to give preferential treatment to friends, family, or even acquaintances because their presence feels safe and predictable, and it's easier to act in their favor than to treat everyone with equal fairness. This bias runs deep in human nature, influencing our actions even when we consciously know that fairness should prevail. The reason familiarity trumps fairness lies in our psychological wiring. Throughout evolution, humans have relied on trusted individuals within their social circles for survival, creating a strong bond of loyalty. This instinct to favor those within our in-group makes it difficult to objectively assess situations based solely on fairness. For instance, we might hire someone we know personally over a more qualified candidate simply because it feels more comfortable, or we might overlook the flaws of a close friend while harshly judging a stranger for similar mistakes. The painful reality is that this bias perpetuates inequality and injustice. It prevents us from seeing the bigger picture and makes us more likely to perpetuate unfairness, even when we have the power to do otherwise. It creates invisible barriers that keep us from truly embracing fairness in our decisions, fostering favoritism over objectivity. Comfort often leads to ignoring consequences. When life is easy and comfortable, it becomes dangerously easy to ignore the consequences of our actions. Comfort lulls us into a false sense of security, where the immediate satisfaction of our desires takes precedence over the long-term impact of our decisions. The more comfortable we become, the less motivated we are to consider the ripple effects of our choices, whether it's in our personal relationships, finances, or health. This phenomenon is rooted in our natural desire to avoid discomfort. When things are going well, we tend to focus only on the present, often disregarding future risks or potential harm. It's why people procrastinate on important tasks, indulge in unhealthy habits, or neglect relationships that need care, because the immediate pleasure of comfort feels more rewarding than the future consequences of inaction or negligence. The danger lies in the complacency that comfort breeds. We can become so focused on maintaining our current state of ease that we fail to see how our actions are eroding our future stability. Over time, the consequences of our neglect accumulate, whether it's declining health, strained relationships, or financial ruin. Ironically, it's often when things are the most comfortable that we become the least proactive in ensuring that they remain that way. Comfort becomes a trap, blinding us to the slow erosion of everything that matters until it's too late to undo the damage. Scarcity mindset fuels selfishness. When people operate under a scarcity mindset, they perceive the world as a limited space where resources, whether they are money, love, attention, or opportunities, are in short supply. This mindset triggers an instinctual fear of losing out, leading individuals to hoard what they have and prioritize their own needs above others. In this state, people become more self-centered as they believe that helping others or sharing resources will deplete their own. The fear of not having enough breeds an unhealthy level of competition and selfishness, distorting the way they view both the world and those around them. Scarcity creates a sense of urgency and anxiety, making it difficult to think about the bigger picture or the needs of others. When people are focused on securing their own survival, whether it's financially, socially, or emotionally, they are less likely to show empathy or extend help to others. The immediate drive to protect what little they perceive they have can justify actions that are harmful or unfair to others, whether it's cutting others down to get ahead in the workplace or withholding resources in personal relationships. The scarcity mindset pushes people to adopt a me-first attitude, even at the expense of those around them. The harsh truth is that when we're constantly focused on the fear of not having enough, we forget that abundance often comes through collaboration and generosity. Scarcity blinds us to the potential for growth and connection, locking us into a cycle of selfishness that limits our ability to trust, share, or genuinely support one another. History's lessons are often ignored. Despite the wealth of knowledge and wisdom available from the past, human nature often leads us to ignore history's most important lessons. The patterns of conflict, societal collapse, and human suffering that have occurred throughout history seem to fade from collective memory once the immediate threat has passed. People are often so focused on the present or the future that they fail to reflect on the past, believing that the problems that once plagued humanity are either irrelevant or unlikely to recur. However, the uncomfortable truth is that the same mistakes are often repeated because we are too quick to assume that this time will be different. This tendency to disregard history is driven by the human desire for progress and the illusion that we have evolved beyond the mistakes of those who came before us. We convince ourselves that we are more enlightened, more advanced, and more capable than previous generations. The reality, however, is that the fundamental aspects of human behavior, greed, power struggles, prejudice, and fear, have not changed. While technology, systems, and societies may evolve, the core issues that lead to war, inequality, and injustice remain largely unchanged. The result is a tragic cycle. By ignoring history's lessons, we doom ourselves to repeat its errors, often at great costs. From political polarization to environmental destruction, humanity continues to make the same mistakes over and over again. The painful truth is that, despite having access to centuries of historical knowledge, we continue to ignore it, allowing history to repeat itself in devastating ways. Fear drives aggressive behavior. At the root of much human aggression lies a powerful, often unacknowledged force: fear. When people feel threatened, whether physically, emotionally, or socially, fear can trigger aggressive responses as a defense mechanism. The fight or flight instinct, hardwired into our brains, is designed to protect us from danger, but when faced with perceived threats, whether real or imagined, some people react by lashing out in anger or aggression, driven by an overwhelming need to protect themselves. This aggression isn't always violent. It can manifest in verbal attacks, hostility, or manipulative behavior. The fear of vulnerability, rejection, or loss often fuels these reactions as it creates a sense of powerlessness and the desperate need to regain control. The irony is that while aggression is meant to defend us, it often causes more harm than good. Fear clouds judgment, making it difficult to think clearly or rationally. In social or professional situations, this fear-driven aggression can destroy relationships, undermine trust, and escalate conflicts unnecessarily. People may attack others preemptively, convinced that they are in danger, when in reality, they are reacting to their own insecurities and fears. The painful truth is that fear can drive us to behave in ways we would never consider in a calm, rational state. It taps into our primal instincts, causing us to act out of self-preservation rather than thoughtful consideration. In the end, fear doesn't just breed aggression, it often perpetuates a cycle of conflict and harm, making it harder to break free and find peaceful resolutions. Justifying unethical actions protects self-image. Humans have an uncanny ability to justify actions that go against their morals, especially when those actions serve their self-interest. This psychological defense mechanism, which helps preserve our self-image as good or ethical people, allows us to bypass the guilt and shame that would normally accompany unethical behavior. By rationalizing our actions, telling ourselves that they were necessary, harmless, or even morally justified, we create a narrative that allows us to reconcile our behavior with our self-perception. The need to protect one's self-image is powerful. If we were to fully acknowledge the wrongness of our actions, it could shatter the carefully constructed image we hold of ourselves as ethical, moral individuals. So instead of facing the discomfort of guilt, we create excuses. Everyone else is doing it. It wasn't that bad, or I had no choice. These justifications help reduce the cognitive dissonance that occurs when our actions conflict with our values, making us feel less conflicted about the decisions we've made. This process isn't just a personal matter. It can ripple outward. Once we justify our unethical behavior, we are more likely to continue engaging in it, each time making the rationalization a little easier. The real danger of this cycle is how it erodes integrity, not just for the individual, but for the broader community. When people start justifying harmful actions, whether it's cheating, lying, or exploiting others, they normalize unethical behavior, further distorting their sense of right and wrong. In the end, the need to protect one's self-image becomes a powerful force that allows unethical actions to flourish under the guise of justification. People think they'd be better than others in bad situations. There's a deeply ingrained belief in many that, given the right circumstances, they would handle difficult or morally challenging situations better than others. It's easy to believe that, if faced with a crisis or a moral dilemma, we would rise above the chaos, make the right choice, and act with integrity. The truth, however, is that this belief is often misguided. In reality, people are more likely to act in ways they never imagined when the pressure of a bad situation is upon them. This sense of superiority is built on the comforting idea that we are somehow above the mistakes or misdeeds of others. This mindset can be particularly dangerous because it leads to a lack of empathy or understanding for those who do falter in difficult moments. We judge others harshly, thinking, I would never do that, without realizing that in the heat of the moment, our own actions could be driven by fear, self-preservation, or the desire to fit in. The chilling reality is that many of us would likely make similar, if not worse, choices if placed in comparable circumstances. This bias is often compounded by the fact that we are viewing others' behavior from a comfortable distance, detached from the emotions and pressures that they face in real time. The truth is that moral behavior is not always as clear-cut as we like to believe, and in bad situations, even the most well-intentioned people can act in ways they never expected. Personal mistakes are forgiven more easily than others. One of the harsh truths about human nature is how we tend to forgive our own mistakes more easily than we forgive those of others. When we slip up, we're quick to justify our actions, minimize their impact, or even dismiss them entirely. We rationalize that circumstances led us to make a poor choice or that we didn't mean to cause harm. In our minds, the intention behind our actions often outweighs the consequences, allowing us to grant ourselves a level of forgiveness that we would rarely extend to someone else. This tendency is rooted in self-preservation. We are naturally inclined to protect our self-image and avoid feelings of guilt or shame, so we make excuses to smooth over our faults. It's much harder to look at our own mistakes objectively because we are emotionally invested in the outcome. On the other hand, when someone else makes a mistake, we view their actions through a harsher lens. We are more likely to judge them based on their behavior alone without considering their circumstances or intentions. This discrepancy in forgiveness creates a double standard that can lead to resentment, misunderstandings, and fractured relationships. The truth is that while we may show compassion to ourselves, we often withhold it from others, deepening divides and preventing the growth of empathy and understanding. Our ability to forgive others is a reflection of how willing we are to see them as human, just as flawed and deserving of compassion as we are. Loss aversion drives decision-making. One of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior is loss aversion, the tendency to fear losses more than we value equivalent gains. This psychological bias means that the pain of losing something feels far more intense than the pleasure of gaining something of equal value. In decision-making, this fear of loss often outweighs the potential for future benefit, leading us to make choices that are driven more by the desire to avoid losing something than by the possibility of gaining more. Whether it's in finances, relationships, or career moves, the fear of losing what we already have can paralyze us, even when the potential for improvement is far greater. Loss aversion explains why people are reluctant to take risks, even when the odds are in their favor. For instance, investors may hold on to losing stocks because the thought of accepting a loss feels more unbearable than the potential to gain later. Similarly, in personal relationships, people may stay in unhealthy dynamics because the fear of losing the relationship feels more painful than the prospect of moving on and finding something better. This bias can trap us in stagnation. We become so focused on protecting what we have that we miss out on opportunities for growth or improvement. The result is a pattern of self-protection where we avoid the discomfort of loss, often at the expense of our future well-being. Loss aversion blinds us to the reality that sometimes moving forward requires letting go of what we hold so tightly. Bias clouds judgment. Human judgment is often clouded by biases, unconscious mental shortcuts that distort our perceptions and decisions. These biases, whether based on race, gender, class, or personal experience, affect how we interpret situations, evaluate people, and make choices. No matter how objective we try to be, our brains are wired to take shortcuts, and these shortcuts are influenced by our past experiences, societal conditioning, and emotions. This makes it nearly impossible to make completely impartial decisions, as our biases often guide us toward what feels comfortable or familiar, rather than what is true or fair. The danger of bias lies in how it skews our ability to see the world as it truly is. For example, we might overlook someone's qualifications because they don't fit a stereotypical mold, or dismiss an idea simply because it challenges our worldview. This leads to unfair judgments, inequality, and missed opportunities for growth or understanding. Bias also impacts relationships, whether at work or in personal life, leading to miscommunication, distrust, or discrimination. What's even more disturbing is that biases often operate below the level of conscious awareness, so we may not even realize how they shape our actions. We believe we are making decisions based on reason or facts, but in reality, our biases are pulling the strings. The harsh truth is that despite our best intentions, bias clouds judgment, limiting our ability to connect with others and understand the world in its entirety. It keeps us trapped in narrow perspectives and perpetuates inequality, making it all the more crucial to recognize and confront our own biases. Revenge is often chosen over reconciliation. When we've been wronged or hurt, the desire for revenge often takes hold in a powerful and visceral way. The urge to retaliate, to make the person who harmed us feel the pain they've caused, can feel like justice. It offers a sense of control and retribution, a way to restore balance in a world that feels unfair. In those moments, revenge can seem more satisfying and immediate than reconciliation. Reconciliation requires vulnerability, understanding, and sometimes forgiveness, acts that can be emotionally exhausting and uncomfortable. It demands us to let go of our hurt and open ourselves up to healing, which is not only difficult, but often feels like we're letting the other person off the hook. Revenge, on the other hand, provides instant emotional relief. It offers a sense of closure, even if that closure is temporary and harmful. The cycle of retaliation is deeply ingrained in human nature, fueled by a primal need for justice and fairness. The irony is that while revenge may feel like a quick fix, it often perpetuates the cycle of pain and conflict, leaving both parties more entrenched in their animosity. The harsh truth is that in many situations, revenge is easier and feels more just than reconciliation. It's easier to hurt someone back than to try and rebuild trust. But what we often fail to realize is that in choosing revenge, we sacrifice the potential for true peace and healing, creating more harm in the long run. Self-interest guides actions, even in groups. At the heart of human behavior lies a stark truth. Self-interest often drives our actions, even when we are part of a group. Whether in a workplace, a family, or a society, individuals may appear to be cooperating, but underneath, their decisions are typically shaped by personal gain. This isn't necessarily malicious, it's simply the way we are wired. The brain is hardwired to prioritize personal well-being and success, even if it means undermining the collective good. We may align ourselves with the group, contribute to shared goals, or make sacrifices, but often we are still calculating what benefits us in return, whether it's recognition, power, or security. This self-interest doesn't just manifest in overt actions, it subtly influences our choices in ways we may not even be aware of. For instance, we may downplay others' contributions, take more credit for group successes, or prioritize our needs when it's time to make a difficult decision. Even in groups that have noble collective goals, like charitable organizations or close-knit families, individual desires often come to the forefront. This can lead to friction, resentment, and ultimately a breakdown in cooperation. The uncomfortable truth is that while groups can achieve extraordinary things, they are also vulnerable to the selfish impulses of their members. Human nature tends to favor personal success over the success of the group, which makes true selfless collaboration rare. When self-interest is placed above collective well-being, it's easy for a group to fracture, as everyone silently pursues their own agenda at the expense of the greater good. Avoiding discomfort keeps us from taking action. At the heart of human behavior is an uncomfortable truth. We often avoid taking action simply to escape discomfort, whether it's the fear of failure, the anxiety of confrontation, or the stress of change. Our natural tendency is to steer clear of anything that makes us uncomfortable. This instinct, rooted in the brain's desire to protect us from stress, can prevent us from making necessary changes or taking risks that could lead to personal growth. It's easier to stay in familiar situations, even if they're less than ideal, because they don't force us to face the discomfort of the unknown. The problem arises when avoiding discomfort becomes a pattern. We procrastinate on difficult tasks, delay important conversations, or resist making decisions that would push us out of our comfort zones. In doing so, we trap ourselves in stagnation, afraid to face the temporary discomfort that could lead to long-term benefits. The irony is that the very discomfort we fear often holds the key to progress, growth, and improvement. Yet, the immediate relief of avoiding it feels far more satisfying in the short term. This cycle of avoiding discomfort can have serious consequences. By choosing to stay comfortable, we miss opportunities, limit our potential, and avoid necessary challenges that could lead to transformation. In a world that rewards action, the fear of discomfort can be one of the most powerful forces holding us back from reaching our full potential. Seeking approval drives decisions. At the heart of many human decisions lies a powerful, often unconscious desire for approval. Whether it's from family, friends, colleagues, or even strangers, the need to be validated and accepted shapes our choices in profound ways. We are social creatures, wired to seek connection and belonging, and approval is the currency that fosters those bonds. This craving for external validation can influence everything from career choices to personal relationships, pushing us to conform to social norms and expectations, even when it goes against our own desires or best interests. The truth is, we often make decisions not based on what's best for ourselves, but on what will make us look good in the eyes of others. This might mean choosing a job because it's prestigious rather than fulfilling, staying in a relationship for the sake of others' approval, or even altering our opinions and beliefs to fit in with a group. While the desire for approval can lead to positive social connections and opportunities, it can also undermine authenticity, leaving us trapped in cycles of people-pleasing and self-doubt. The painful reality is that seeking approval can diminish our own agency and self-worth. It leads to decisions driven by external pressure rather than internal desire. Over time, this constant need for validation can erode confidence, leaving us feeling disconnected from our true selves. Ultimately, the more we seek approval, the less we listen to our own needs, losing sight of who we are and what truly makes us happy. Selfishness is more apparent in crises. When faced with a crisis, whether it's a natural disaster, a financial collapse, or even a personal emergency, human nature often reveals its darker side, selfishness. In moments of intense stress or fear, people instinctively prioritize their own survival or comfort over the well-being of others. The survival instinct, which is deeply ingrained in our psychology, becomes amplified when resources are limited, danger is imminent, or uncertainty prevails. In these moments, empathy and cooperation are often pushed aside, and self-preservation takes center stage. During a crisis, the lines between us and them become sharper. People act in ways they might not under normal circumstances, grabbing resources without consideration for others, abandoning those in need, or refusing to help in favor of personal safety. The chaotic nature of a crisis heightens these reactions, making it more difficult to think beyond immediate personal concerns. Even when help is needed, many will wait for others to act first, prioritizing their own security before extending a hand. This selfishness isn't always deliberate. It's a primal response driven by fear and survival, but it's undeniably revealing. The true nature of individuals often surfaces in these extreme moments, and what's most telling is how quickly the collective spirit of cooperation and community can fracture when each person is left to fend for themselves. While crises can bring out incredible acts of kindness and bravery, they also expose the painful truth that, when survival is on the line, self-interest often reigns supreme. Routine actions are often harmful, There's a quiet danger in the routines we develop, the small, seemingly harmless actions we repeat day after day without thinking. While routines provide comfort and a sense of control, they can also trap us in cycles of behavior that undermine our well-being. Over time, the habits we take for granted can become detrimental, whether it's an unhealthy diet, a sedentary lifestyle, or even toxic thought patterns. The more ingrained these actions become, the harder they are to break, and the more difficult it becomes to recognize how they're harming us. It's easy to overlook the harm in routine actions because they feel normal. They are the things we do without questioning, often because they offer convenience, comfort, or familiarity. But what seems simple, like skipping meals, avoiding exercise, or succumbing to stress, can build up, leading to long-term physical or emotional damage. Routines can create a false sense of security, making us believe that because we've always done things this way, it must be fine. In reality, it's this very complacency that allows harmful habits to flourish unchecked. The truth is that routine actions, when left unexamined, can slowly chip away at our health, happiness, and potential. We often become so accustomed to the ease of familiarity that we fail to notice how our routines are working against us. Breaking free from these habits requires conscious effort and self-awareness, but it's a necessary step in creating a life that's not just lived, but truly lived well. Power can corrupt, even when undeserved. There's a chilling truth about power. It has the ability to corrupt, even in those who haven't earned or fully deserve it. When people are placed in positions of authority, whether through luck, inheritance, or a fluke, they often start to believe that they are entitled to wield that power without restraint. This belief can easily morph into a sense of superiority, leading individuals to abuse their newfound influence in ways they may not have considered before. The corrupting influence of power is not just about gaining wealth or control. It's about the subtle psychological shift that occurs when one believes they are above the rules and beyond reproach. The effect of power, even when undeserved, is insidious. It feeds the ego, gradually stripping away humility and empathy. People begin to see themselves as different from others, more important, more deserving. As they grow more accustomed to exercising control, they often forget the struggles or needs of those below them. What started as a privilege becomes an entitlement, and that entitlement drives decisions that can harm or disregard others. The danger lies in how power distorts a person's sense of self and morality. Those who were once humble and empathetic can become authoritarian, ruthless, or even cruel, simply because they are no longer held accountable in the same way. The chilling reality is that power doesn't have to be earned to corrupt. It only needs to be granted, and the effects can be swift and devastating. It's a stark reminder that power, when unchecked or undeserved, can transform anyone into someone unrecognizable. Emotions often override logic. One of the most powerful forces in human nature is emotion. Time and time again, we see how emotions can overpower even the most rational thought. In moments of anger, fear, love, or frustration, our feelings take control of our decisions, pushing logic aside. When we are overwhelmed by emotion, our judgment becomes clouded, and we act impulsively, often with regret later. The brain, designed to respond quickly to emotional stimuli for survival, can prioritize immediate emotional relief over thoughtful reasoning, leading to decisions that aren't always in our best interest. This emotional dominance is evident in personal relationships, where arguments can escalate because feelings of hurt or jealousy cloud rational communication. It's seen in decision-making, where people make impulsive purchases or snap judgments in the heat of the moment, ignoring the logical consequences. It's also apparent in larger societal issues, such as politics, where emotional appeals can sway public opinion more effectively than logical arguments or facts. The uncomfortable truth is that while we like to think of ourselves as logical and rational beings, our emotions often dictate our actions. The intense feelings we experience, whether positive or negative, can lead us to act in ways that defy reason, sometimes with harmful or irreversible consequences. Emotions, in their raw form, are not always rational, but they are incredibly powerful, driving us to make decisions that feel right in the moment, even when they defy logic. Group pressure influences behavior, even in unethical ways. Human beings are inherently social creatures, and our desire to belong often leads us to conform to the behaviors and beliefs of the groups we are part of. This drive to fit in, to avoid rejection, can push us to make decisions we might otherwise consider unethical. In group settings, whether at work, among friends, or in larger societal movements, the influence of others can override our own moral compass. People are far more likely to engage in actions they know are wrong if they feel they are supported, or even pressured, by the group around them. The power of group pressure is seen in countless historical and social contexts, whether it's bullying, discrimination, or even more extreme acts like corruption or violence. Individuals often justify their behavior by pointing to the group's norms or actions. Everyone else is doing it becomes a rationalization, making unethical behavior seem acceptable because it's being normalized by the collective. This dynamic is reinforced by a deep desire to avoid standing out or being ostracized, even when the group is engaged in wrongdoing. The uncomfortable reality is that group pressure can lead people to abandon their personal values, overriding their individual moral judgments for the sake of group cohesion. In such situations, ethical boundaries blur, and behaviors that would be unthinkable on their own become acceptable in the context of the group. The result is a collective sense of impunity, where individuals feel less responsible for their actions and more likely to engage in unethical behavior they might have otherwise avoided. People prioritize their family over strangers. At the core of human behavior lies an undeniable truth. People tend to prioritize the well-being of their family over that of strangers. This instinct is deeply ingrained in us, rooted in survival and evolutionary psychology. Our families represent our closest bonds, and we have evolved to protect and care for them above all else. The desire to ensure the survival and success of those we are intimately connected to is hardwired into our brains, often leading us to make decisions that favor their needs, sometimes even at the expense of others. This natural bias can be seen in everyday actions, from the way we allocate time and resources to how we make sacrifices for loved ones. A parent may go to great lengths to provide for their children, even if it means neglecting the needs of others. A spouse might defend their partner's interests fiercely, regardless of fairness. This prioritization isn't inherently bad. It's a protective mechanism that has helped humans thrive. However, it also raises uncomfortable truths about our capacity for favoritism. The more we favor family, the less we are inclined to treat strangers with the same level of compassion, even when their needs are just as urgent or deserving. The reality is that this preference can lead to ethical dilemmas and difficult moral decisions. While it's natural to care more for those close to us, the challenge lies in balancing these familial bonds with a broader sense of compassion for all people. Overestimating abilities leads to poor decisions. One of the most dangerous pitfalls in human decision-making is the tendency to overestimate our own abilities. When we overestimate our competence, we become more prone to taking unnecessary risks, making hasty decisions, and underestimating the challenges ahead. This inflated sense of confidence blinds us to our limitations, leading us to make poor choices that we would never consider if we had a more accurate self-assessment. The result is often failure, disappointment, or damage to relationships and reputations. Overconfidence can manifest in many ways, from underpreparing for important tasks to taking on projects that are far beyond our current skill level. The more we overestimate what we can do, the less likely we are to take the necessary precautions or seek the help we need. This can be seen in everything from financial investments to professional decisions, where individuals convinced of their own expertise make choices that are reckless and ill-informed. The harsh reality is that overestimating our abilities doesn't just lead to bad decisions, it can also damage our growth. When we fail because we didn't realistically assess our strengths and weaknesses, we miss the opportunity to learn and improve. Instead of recognizing our need for development, we double down on our errors, convinced that we are right. This self-deception traps us in a cycle of poor judgment, preventing us from truly growing and making wiser decisions in the future. Helping is conditional on perceived deservingness. At the heart of human kindness lies a troubling truth. The willingness to help others is often influenced by how deserving we believe they are of our assistance. We don't simply help everyone in need. We judge who is worthy of support based on their actions, appearance, or even our personal biases. This judgment of deservingness can shape whether we extend a helping hand or turn away. People are more likely to offer help to those they believe have earned it or who fit their perception of deserving individuals, such as those who have worked hard or those who share similar values or circumstances. This conditional generosity is evident in countless situations. We might offer help to a friend who has fallen on hard times, but hesitate to help a stranger, assuming they might misuse the assistance. We might be more inclined to donate to causes that align with our beliefs, while disregarding those we perceive as less deserving. This judgmental lens distorts our understanding of true compassion, making it less about need and more about whether we perceive someone as worthy of our support. The painful truth is that often our desire to help is tied more to our own judgments than to the genuine needs of others. When helping is conditional, it loses its power to foster empathy and understanding. Instead of viewing helping as an unconditional act of kindness, it becomes transactional, influenced by subjective perceptions of who deserves to be supported and who does not. Judgment is based on social norms, not truth. Humans are profoundly influenced by social norms when it comes to making judgments, often placing more value on what is socially acceptable than on what is objectively true. From the clothes we wear to the opinions we express, society plays a powerful role in shaping our beliefs about what is right and wrong. These norms act as invisible guidelines, often dictating how we perceive others and even ourselves. What society deems acceptable or admirable becomes the standard by which we judge others, regardless of whether those judgments align with truth or fairness. This social conditioning is powerful because it provides a sense of belonging and security. Conforming to societal expectations can be comforting and keeps us from standing out or facing rejection. However, the discomfort of challenging these norms often leads people to judge others based on appearances or behaviors that align with societal standards rather than on the underlying truth of a situation. For example, someone may be judged harshly for their unconventional lifestyle or beliefs, even if they are living authentically and ethically. Similarly, people may receive praise for fitting in, even when their actions are morally questionable or untruthful. The painful truth is that, in many situations, what is socially right is not always aligned with what is truly fair or just. Social norms can perpetuate biases, discrimination, and inequality, as they often prioritize conformity over truth. This widespread reliance on social judgments limits our ability to see people and situations as they truly are, trapped instead in the confines of what is deemed acceptable by society. Conformity often suppresses individuality. In the pressure-filled landscape of social expectations, conformity often takes precedence over individuality. Humans have an innate desire to belong, to fit in, and to be accepted by those around them. This drive is so powerful that it can lead individuals to suppress their true selves, adopting behaviors, beliefs, and appearances that align with the group, rather than reflecting their authentic identity. The fear of being different, of standing out, can make it easier to follow the crowd, even when it means sacrificing personal values or desires. The problem with conformity is that it stifles creativity, self-expression, and the freedom to think independently. When everyone around us adheres to the same norms and standards, it becomes increasingly difficult to hear our own voice or act on our unique perspectives. In professional settings, social circles, or even family dynamics, the pressure to conform often pushes individuals to blend in, even if it means abandoning their passions, goals, or beliefs in the process. This is not just a minor inconvenience, it's a profound loss of individuality. The desire to avoid judgment or exclusion can keep us from exploring who we truly are, from pursuing paths that might be unconventional but fulfilling. The harsh truth is that conformity, in its pursuit of social harmony, often forces people to live lives that are not their own. Instead of celebrating difference, it suppresses it, leading to a world where uniqueness is drowned out by the noise of collective sameness. People prioritize status over truth. At the core of human behavior lies a powerful, often uncomfortable truth. People frequently prioritize status over truth. In social, professional, and even personal contexts, individuals often choose to align themselves with popular opinions or maintain a certain image rather than confront uncomfortable or inconvenient truths. This is driven by the inherent desire for acceptance, respect, and power. The need to maintain or elevate one's status, whether within a group, organization, or society at large, can overshadow the importance of facts, integrity, and honesty. This behavior is especially evident in situations where admitting the truth might lead to a loss of social standing, influence, or credibility. People will often suppress or distort the truth to avoid the backlash of being seen as wrong, unpopular, or challenging the dominant narrative. It's why political leaders, celebrities, and even ordinary individuals may deny facts or mislead others to maintain their social position or public persona. In a world where status can bring power, security, and approval, truth becomes secondary. The painful reality is that prioritizing status over truth erodes trust and authenticity. When truth is sacrificed for the sake of maintaining or advancing social standing, relationships suffer, decisions are based on falsehoods, and progress is hindered. Ultimately, when the pursuit of status eclipses the value of truth, society becomes less honest, more divided, and unable to grow in meaningful ways. Judgment of others is harsher than self-judgment. There's a deeply ingrained truth in human behavior. We tend to judge others more harshly than we judge ourselves. It's easy to scrutinize and criticize people for their mistakes, flaws, or shortcomings, often overlooking the complexities of their situations. The instant we see someone's failure or imperfection, our minds rush to conclusions, forming judgments that seem justified by their actions. However, when it comes to our own mistakes, we often offer ourselves a level of forgiveness or rationalization that we would never extend to others. We might excuse our behavior as circumstantial, downplay the consequences, or simply blame external factors, all while holding others to a much higher standard. This discrepancy between how we judge others and ourselves can stem from a number of factors. We are more familiar with our own contexts, struggles, and intentions, which makes it easier to justify our actions. Meanwhile, we view others from an external perspective, lacking the full understanding of their circumstances, which allows us to be more critical. This tendency often creates a double standard, where we demand perfection from others while granting ourselves room for error. The truth is, this harsher judgment of others reveals an uncomfortable aspect of human nature, a need to feel superior or morally right. When we judge others too harshly, we not only fail to understand their experiences, but also miss the opportunity to empathize. By holding others to unrealistic standards, we fail to recognize the shared humanity that binds us all. Selfishness increases when personal risk is involved. When personal risk is on the line, the instinct to prioritize oneself over others becomes even stronger. In times of danger or uncertainty, people are far more likely to act out of self-interest, often at the expense of those around them. This is a primal response rooted in survival instincts. The need to protect oneself takes precedence over all other concerns, whether it's a financial setback, a physical threat, or an emotional crisis. When the stakes are high for an individual, the natural impulse is to focus solely on securing one's own safety or well-being. The shocking truth is that in these moments, altruistic behavior becomes rarer. People might withhold help from others, make decisions that ensure their personal gain, or even abandon those who depend on them, all in the name of protecting their own interests. It's a harsh reality that when faced with personal risk, empathy and selflessness often take a back seat. Even in relationships where loyalty and trust have been established, the fear of loss or harm can turn people into more selfish versions of themselves, willing to let go of the needs of others to preserve their own comfort or security. This tendency reveals a deep truth about human nature. When faced with the possibility of losing something vital, we often turn inward, narrowing our focus to ensure our survival, both emotionally and physically. In these moments, selfishness is not just a flaw, it's a survival mechanism, one that can override the impulse to help or support others. Group identity distorts moral behavior. When individuals align themselves with a particular group, their sense of right and wrong can become distorted by the values and norms of that group. Group identity creates a powerful bond, often leading people to adopt the group's beliefs and behaviors, even when they contradict personal morals or ethical standards. The need to belong and the desire for acceptance within the group can cloud an individual's judgment, making them more likely to justify unethical actions if they are sanctioned or overlooked by the group. This distortion is especially evident in situations where the group's interests are at odds with broader ethical principles. People may participate in harmful behaviors, such as discrimination, violence, or corruption, because they are supported or excused by the group. The more someone identifies with a group, the less likely they are to critically evaluate its actions or question its moral implications. Instead, they rationalize behavior that would otherwise be unacceptable, all in the name of loyalty or unity. The troubling truth is that group identity can override an individual's moral compass. It leads to a dangerous sense of us versus them, where the group's values and actions are seen as justified, regardless of the harm they cause. This mindset fosters division, encourages conformity, and undermines the pursuit of a universal moral code. Ultimately, group identity, while providing a sense of belonging, can distort our sense of right and wrong, making it easier to compromise our ethics for the sake of group cohesion. People act out of fear of judgment. A fundamental truth about human behavior is the powerful influence that fear of judgment has on our actions. We are constantly aware of how others perceive us, and this awareness shapes our decisions, often more than we realize. The fear of being judged, criticized, or rejected can lead people to modify their behavior, thoughts, and even beliefs to conform to what is socially acceptable or expected. This drive to avoid negative evaluation can compel us to suppress our true selves, hide our flaws, or make decisions that don't truly align with our desires or values, simply to maintain approval. This fear runs deep and is rooted in our need for acceptance and belonging. Throughout history, individuals who stood out or defied societal expectations faced exclusion, ostracism, and even punishment. Though society has evolved, the basic instinct to fit in and avoid social rejection remains a driving force. People may choose careers, relationships, or lifestyles, not because they are what they truly want, but because they fear judgment from others. The pressure to conform can lead to inauthenticity as individuals present a version of themselves that they think others will approve of, often sacrificing their own happiness or individuality in the process. The painful reality is that this constant fear of judgment can limit personal freedom and self-expression. Instead of living authentically, many are trapped in cycles of self-censorship and people-pleasing. The desire to avoid judgment prevents us from taking risks, being vulnerable, and embracing who we truly are, leading to a life shaped by the expectations of others rather than by our own true desires. Familiarity breeds tolerance for injustice. The more we are exposed to something, the more we tend to accept it, even if it's wrong. This truth about human nature reveals how familiarity can dull our sensitivity to injustice. When we witness unfairness or wrongdoing repeatedly, it becomes less shocking, and eventually, we begin to tolerate it. This process happens subtly. Over time, the shocking becomes normal, and the unacceptable becomes acceptable. Whether it's corruption in government, inequality in society, or abuse in relationships, the more we encounter these injustices, the easier it becomes to ignore them, rationalize them, or even accept them as part of life. Familiarity creates a sense of complacency. The initial shock of witnessing an injustice may stir us to action, but as we see the same patterns repeated over time, we become desensitized. What once seemed outrageous may eventually seem just another part of the landscape, something we can live with. This desensitization leads to a dangerous tolerance, where we stop questioning, stop fighting, and stop demanding change. We become so accustomed to the pain or inequality that it no longer feels worth challenging. The painful reality is that, by accepting injustices as part of the norm, we perpetuate them. The longer we allow ourselves to be exposed to these wrongs without protest, the more we enable them to continue. Familiarity breeds not just tolerance, but apathy, and in doing so, we risk losing our capacity for empathy and the drive to create a more just world. The comfort of sameness is preferred over progress. Human nature often favors the familiar, even when it's clear that progress requires change. The comfort of sameness, the routine, the predictable, the safe, provides a sense of stability and security that is difficult to let go of, even if it means remaining stagnant. Change, while often necessary for growth, brings uncertainty and discomfort, and most people instinctively shy away from it. This resistance to change is not always about actively rejecting progress, but rather about the emotional discomfort that comes with stepping into the unknown. When faced with the possibility of progress, whether in personal growth, social change, or technological advancement, many choose to stay in the familiar because it feels safer. People often opt for the status quo, even if it means enduring inefficiencies, injustices, or dissatisfaction, simply because the uncertainty of change is too overwhelming. The fear of failure, the risk of loss, and the anxiety of breaking from tradition or routine often outweigh the potential benefits of progress. This tendency to cling to the comfort of sameness has deep roots in our evolutionary past, where stability was key to survival. However, in modern times, this same instinct can hold us back from reaching our potential, both individually and collectively. The uncomfortable truth is that while progress requires discomfort and risk, the allure of the familiar often keeps people stuck in outdated systems, preventing meaningful change and growth. Ownership increases perceived value. There's a fascinating psychological truth about human behavior. Ownership has the power to dramatically increase the perceived value of something. Once we claim something as our own, Whether it's a physical object, an idea, or even a relationship, we tend to view it as more valuable simply because it belongs to us. This bias, known as the endowment effect, means that we place higher worth on things we own than on identical items that don't belong to us. The simple act of ownership creates an emotional attachment, and this attachment clouds our judgment, making us feel that what we possess is inherently more valuable, useful, or important. This effect can be seen in many areas of life. For instance, people often overestimate the value of their personal belongings, whether it's an old piece of furniture, a car, or even an idea they've come up with. The moment something becomes ours, it takes on sentimental or intrinsic value that it may not have had before. This bias also influences our decisions, leading us to hold on to things longer than we should, whether it's a relationship, a job, or an object, simply because we've invested in it emotionally. The problem is that this inflated perception can lead to poor decision-making. We may overvalue possessions, resist letting go of things we no longer need, or hold on to unhealthy attachments, all because of the emotional investment of ownership. The truth is, ownership makes us blind to the true worth of something, often leading us to place value on things for reasons that are more about our own attachment than their actual utility or worth. Group dynamics can justify unethical acts. In group settings, individuals often behave in ways they never would alone, as the dynamics of the group can subtly shift moral boundaries. The power of groupthink, social pressure, and the desire for acceptance can lead people to justify unethical acts that they might otherwise reject. When everyone in a group agrees on something, especially something that goes against personal ethics, the collective mindset often overpowers individual judgment. The desire to fit in, to not disrupt the group, or to avoid being singled out can lead individuals to suppress their conscience and engage in harmful behavior. This is especially true in situations where there is a perceived us versus them mentality. In groups that define themselves by their shared values or goals, there's a tendency to justify actions that harm outsiders or those who don't conform. Whether it's in a corporate setting, a sports team, or even a social or political movement, the group's collective identity often supersedes individual morality, enabling behaviors like deception, discrimination, or even violence. People may feel that their actions are justified because everyone else is doing it, or because they are serving a greater cause. The dangerous part of this dynamic is that people often convince themselves that their actions are morally acceptable simply because they're part of the group. This erosion of personal accountability allows unethical behavior to spread, making it harder to break the cycle and challenging the idea that people are inherently moral. Group dynamics create a dangerous environment where wrongdoings are normalized and individuals can justify almost anything as long as it benefits the collective. Self-interest motivates most behavior. At the core of human decision-making lies a powerful force, self-interest. While humans are often capable of acts of kindness, altruism, and empathy, much of what we do is ultimately driven by a desire to improve our own circumstances. Whether it's seeking success, gaining approval, or ensuring personal security, our choices are often guided by the need to benefit ourselves, even when those benefits come at the expense of others. This motivation is deeply ingrained in human nature, shaped by both evolutionary survival instincts and societal pressures. In most situations, people are subconsciously weighing the personal gain or loss involved in their actions. Even when we appear to be helping others, we often have an underlying expectation of receiving something in return, whether it's recognition, emotional satisfaction, or a future favor. This is why people are more likely to invest time and energy in relationships or opportunities that offer clear personal rewards. Even in moments of seemingly selfless behavior, the act often feeds back into our own sense of worth, reinforcing our belief that we are good, valued, or important. The uncomfortable truth is that while we like to think of ourselves as compassionate beings, our actions are often motivated by self-interest, whether we recognize it or not. In a world where survival and success are often tied to personal gain, this drive becomes a natural, if sometimes overlooked force that shapes much of what we do. Empathy extends mainly to in-group members. One of the uncomfortable truths about human nature is that empathy is often reserved for those we identify with, our in-group, whether it's family, friends, or people who share similar backgrounds, beliefs, or experiences. We naturally feel a deeper sense of connection and concern for those we perceive as part of our own group. This sense of belonging triggers an automatic emotional response where we are more likely to understand, care for, and feel the pain of those within our circle. However, when it comes to those outside our immediate group, strangers, people from different cultures, or opposing viewpoints, the same level of empathy is often lacking. This bias stems from evolutionary survival mechanisms. Throughout history, humans survive by relying on tight-knit communities where mutual cooperation and care were essential. Empathy for in-group members fostered trust and solidarity, ensuring the survival of the group. This instinct remains deeply embedded in modern social structures. It makes it easier for us to offer kindness and support to people we feel connected to, while individuals outside our group are often seen as distant, foreign, or even threatening. The troubling reality is that this in-group empathy can lead to exclusion, discrimination, and prejudice. It fosters division and conflict, as people tend to prioritize the needs and feelings of their own group over others. This bias limits our ability to truly understand and connect with people outside our immediate circle, creating barriers to compassion and perpetuating societal rifts. In a world that increasingly requires global cooperation, this natural tendency towards in-group favoritism remains a significant challenge. Mistakes are forgiven more easily when made by oneself. Human nature is deeply rooted in self-compassion, which often leads to a powerful bias. We are far more forgiving of our own mistakes than we are of others. When we slip up, fail, or make poor decisions, we are quick to rationalize our actions, downplay their consequences, or explain them away with excuses. This self-forgiveness comes from a desire to preserve our self-image and avoid the discomfort of guilt. After all, we know our intentions, our struggles, and the context behind our actions in a way that others can't. This unique perspective allows us to view our errors with more empathy, giving us the benefit of the doubt when things go wrong. In contrast, when others make mistakes, we are far less understanding. The same actions, if committed by someone else, are often met with harsh judgment, criticism, or even resentment. We tend to hold others to higher standards, assuming that they should have known better or done better, and we rarely give them the same grace we afford ourselves. This disparity in judgment stems from the lack of emotional connection to others' inner struggles and contexts. We don't know what they were thinking or feeling in the moment, so it's easier to view their actions as flawed rather than understanding their humanity. The painful reality is that this bias not only undermines fairness, but also strains relationships. When we are unwilling to forgive others as easily as we forgive ourselves, we breed resentment, misunderstandings, and division while reinforcing our own sense of entitlement to grace. It's a reminder that true empathy requires extending the same forgiveness to others that we so freely give ourselves. Actions are often justified by intentions, not results. One of the most common ways humans avoid guilt or discomfort is by justifying their actions based on their intentions rather than the actual outcomes. We tend to believe that if our intentions were good, the results should be forgiven, even if they cause harm. This self-serving rationalization helps us protect our self-image and avoid the emotional weight of acknowledging that our actions have negative consequences. It's easier to defend ourselves by focusing on what we meant to do rather than confronting the reality of what we've done. For example, a person might justify being harsh with someone by claiming they were just trying to help, even if their approach hurt the other person, or someone might ignore the negative impact of their actions on others, arguing that they never meant for it to turn out that way. The intention becomes the moral shield, allowing us to sidestep the discomfort of responsibility and to maintain the belief that we are good people. This tendency to prioritize intentions over results distorts accountability. It allows people to avoid learning from their mistakes as they focus more on the positive motivations behind their actions rather than the actual harm they may have caused. The uncomfortable truth is that good intentions cannot undo the damage that results from poor actions. Yet, because it's easier to justify ourselves this way, we often fail to critically assess the true impact of our behavior, allowing harmful patterns to persist. Happiness is prioritized, often at others' expense. At the heart of many human decisions lies an unsettling truth. We often prioritize our own happiness, even if it comes at the expense of others. The pursuit of personal joy, success, and comfort can sometimes lead to choices that harm those around us, whether intentionally or not. It's easy to justify actions when they serve our own well-being, whether it's choosing a career path that benefits us financially but strains a relationship, or seeking personal validation at the cost of someone else's feelings. The desire for happiness is a powerful motivator, but it can blind us to the consequences of our actions on others. This selfish drive is rooted in the basic human need to feel fulfilled, secure, and content. We live in a culture that often teaches us to put ourselves first as a way to achieve personal happiness, which, while important, can lead to harmful behaviors. We may become so focused on our own joy or success that we disregard the emotional or physical toll our decisions take on those around us. For example, people might lie to protect their own reputation, ignore a friend's needs for the sake of personal gain, or overlook the impact of their actions on a larger community. The uncomfortable truth is that when happiness becomes the central focus of our lives, we risk losing sight of the shared responsibility we have to others. The pursuit of individual joy, when unchecked, can create division, resentment, and a lack of empathy, making the pursuit of happiness a double-edged sword. Conformity is easier than moral action. In a world where social pressures are constant, conformity often feels like the path of least resistance. It's much easier to go along with the crowd, to follow the established norms, than to stand up for what's right, especially when doing so might bring conflict, discomfort, or isolation. Human beings are social creatures, deeply influenced by the people around them. The fear of rejection, exclusion, or simply being seen as different often drives us to conform, even when it conflicts with our personal values or morals. The pressure to fit in can cloud our judgment, making it far simpler to accept things as they are, even when they're wrong, than to challenge the status quo. Taking moral action often requires courage, self-reflection, and a willingness to endure discomfort, whether it's confronting injustice, speaking up for the vulnerable, or making sacrifices for the greater good. These actions demand emotional labor and can be met with resistance, making conformity an appealing alternative. It's easier to avoid the tension of moral responsibility and simply align ourselves with what is socially accepted, even when we know it's not the ethical choice. This reluctance to take moral action has profound consequences. It allows harmful behaviors, injustice, and inequality to persist simply because they are the norm. When conformity is easier than standing up for what's right, we perpetuate a cycle of inaction that only strengthens social ills. Conformity may offer temporary peace, but moral action is what ultimately leads to real change. Lying is seen as acceptable when it serves personal goals. Human nature often bends the truth when it aligns with personal desires, goals, or self-preservation. Lying becomes a tool, a convenient way to avoid discomfort, gain advantage, or secure an outcome that benefits us. Whether it's embellishing a resume to land a job, telling a harmless white lie to protect someone's feelings, or fabricating a story to gain social approval, people often justify their dishonesty when it serves their interests. The rationale is simple. If the lie helps achieve something valuable or prevents negative consequences, it seems permissible or even necessary. This tendency is deeply rooted in our instincts to survive, succeed, and protect ourselves. In a competitive world, the temptation to stretch the truth or outright deceive becomes stronger when personal gain is at stake. The uncomfortable truth is that most people, at some point, see lying as a means to an end. In the moment, the perceived benefit of the lie outweighs the moral cost, and the line between right and wrong becomes blurred. However, this acceptance of lying comes with consequences. While it may seem harmless at first, dishonesty erodes trust and damages relationships over time. Even small lies can build up, leading to a cycle of deceit that ultimately undermines credibility and integrity. The harsh reality is that when lying is justified to achieve personal goals, it not only distorts the truth, but can also leave us disconnected from the very values that we claim to uphold. Compassion is stronger for those we relate to. A fundamental truth about human nature is that our compassion tends to be strongest for those we can relate to, whether it's based on shared experiences, similar backgrounds, or common struggles. We naturally feel more empathy and a deeper desire to help those who resemble us in some way. The more we see ourselves in someone else, the easier it is to connect with their pain, joy, or needs. This shared understanding creates an emotional bond that drives us to offer more compassion, support, and kindness. This inclination stems from an evolutionary need to foster close bonds within communities. The people we can relate to are often seen as part of our in-group, and because of our social wiring, we instinctively want to protect and care for them, whether it's family, close friends, or people who share our cultural, religious, or ideological beliefs. We feel naturally drawn to help them in times of distress. However, this empathy does not always extend beyond our immediate circle. People who are different from us, whether in appearance, belief, or background, often receive less compassion, even if they are suffering just as much. The uncomfortable reality is that this bias in compassion can perpetuate division and inequality. It creates a hierarchy of empathy, where some people are seen as more deserving of care than others simply because they are more relatable. This selective compassion can limit our capacity to create truly inclusive, compassionate communities. The truth is that if we want to build a more empathetic world, we must learn to extend our compassion beyond those who resemble us and recognize the humanity in all. People feel entitled to their views regardless of evidence. One of the most frustrating aspects of human nature is the strong sense of entitlement to our beliefs, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that contradicts them. Whether in politics, religion, or personal opinions, many people hold on to their views with unwavering confidence, refusing to reconsider them despite clear, factual proof that they are wrong. This sense of entitlement often comes from the deep connection we feel to our beliefs, as they are tied to our identity, values, and worldview. Admitting that we are wrong would feel like a personal failure, so instead, we dig in our heels and defend our position. This phenomenon is particularly evident in polarized environments where people not only disagree but also believe that their perspective is the right one, regardless of contrary facts. In these situations, the desire to be right becomes stronger than the desire to find the truth. Cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that arises when faced with
conflicting information often drives individuals to dismiss, ignore, or distort the evidence that challenges their beliefs. Instead of acknowledging the truth, people often find ways to justify their stance or avoid confronting facts that might force them to change. The troubling reality is that this entitlement to one's views often leads to division, misunderstandings, and the perpetuation of falsehoods. When people refuse to engage with evidence or consider other perspectives, it not only limits personal growth, but also hinders meaningful dialogue and progress. The power of entitlement to our beliefs can create walls that prevent us from learning, evolving, and truly understanding one another. Selfish decisions are often masked as moral ones. One of the most insidious aspects of human behavior is how easily selfish decisions are disguised as moral or ethical actions. People often convince themselves that their choices, which primarily serve their own interests, are actually in the service of a higher good or moral cause. This allows them to feel justified in making decisions that benefit themselves, while simultaneously avoiding guilt or self-reflection. By framing their actions as morally righteous, they create a narrative that aligns with their desire for personal gain, all while maintaining the appearance of integrity. This tendency can be seen in various situations. A person might advocate for a policy that seems socially beneficial, but which actually serves their financial or professional interests, or someone might justify withholding help from others by claiming that doing so upholds a principle like tough love or personal responsibility, when in fact they're simply avoiding the effort or risk involved in helping. The key is that these selfish motivations are often masked by a veneer of moral reasoning, making it easier to justify actions that would otherwise feel wrong. The uncomfortable reality is that while we may believe we're acting for the greater good, our decisions are often shaped by the desire for personal advantage. This disconnect between the appearance of moral actions and their underlying selfish motivations leads to a lack of true self-awareness and prevents meaningful growth. It's easier to defend selfish behavior when we dress it up in moral terms, but the truth remains. The line between self-interest and morality is often much thinner than we'd like to admit. The majority prefer comfort over fairness. At the core of human behavior lies a difficult truth. Most people prioritize comfort over fairness, especially when fairness requires discomfort or sacrifice. It's far easier to accept a system that benefits us, even if it's not entirely just, than to challenge it and risk our own sense of security. This preference for comfort over fairness is deeply ingrained in human nature as it taps into our survival instincts. We are wired to seek stability, and fairness often demands difficult conversations, action, or changes that unsettle the status quo. The desire to maintain comfort, whether in personal relationships, workplaces, or society, can make us turn a blind eye to inequality or injustice when we feel it doesn't directly affect us. This preference plays out in countless ways. People may ignore the suffering of others, avoid confronting uncomfortable truths, or justify inequities simply because acknowledging them would require effort, change, or a disruption of their own peace. For example, we may avoid supporting policies that challenge our own privilege or comfort, even if those policies would benefit others who are disadvantaged. We choose to stay in situations, systems, or relationships that feel easy or familiar, even when they perpetuate unfairness. The painful reality is that this drive for comfort undermines progress and perpetuates inequality. By choosing comfort over fairness, we become complicit in systems that harm others. To break free from this cycle, we must be willing to embrace discomfort in the pursuit of justice, understanding that true fairness often requires personal sacrifice and change. Fear of loss leads to inaction. Fear of loss is one of the most paralyzing forces in human behavior, often leading people to avoid taking action altogether. Whether it's the fear of losing money, relationships, opportunities, or even personal security, the anxiety surrounding potential loss can create such a sense of dread that it prevents us from making decisions or moving forward. The mind, wired for self-preservation, becomes fixated on avoiding pain rather than pursuing potential gain, causing us to stay stuck in situations that no longer serve us. This fear manifests in many ways: procrastination, indecision, and hesitation. When faced with the possibility of losing something, we can become immobilized, even if the potential benefits of taking action far outweigh the risks. The fear of the unknown or the discomfort of change keeps us locked in a state of inertia. It's easier to stay in familiar, even unsatisfactory circumstances than to take a chance on something that might cause us to lose what we currently have, no matter how much it might hold us back. The harsh reality is that this fear of loss can prevent growth, innovation, and progress. It keeps people from pursuing their dreams, taking risks in relationships, or stepping out of their comfort zones. By focusing solely on what we might lose, we miss the opportunities that could lead to something greater. In the end, the fear of losing what we already have often leads to losing the chance for something better. People avoid responsibility when possible. At the heart of human nature is an instinctive desire to avoid the discomfort and consequences of responsibility, whether it's at work, in personal relationships, or in larger societal issues. People often go to great lengths to shift responsibility to others when things go wrong. Taking responsibility requires acknowledging faults, facing difficult truths, and sometimes enduring guilt or punishment, emotions most people instinctively want to avoid. It's much easier to distance oneself from blame, make excuses, or find someone else to point the finger at. This avoidance of responsibility can manifest in many ways. In the workplace, individuals may pass off their mistakes, blame co-workers, or hide behind team efforts to avoid accountability. In personal relationships, people often deflect responsibility for problems, making it someone else's fault, rather than confronting their own role in the conflict. Even in larger social issues, individuals might downplay their own impact on systemic problems, preferring to stay passive rather than taking action. The uncomfortable truth is that this tendency to avoid responsibility prevents growth and accountability. It stunts personal development, erodes trust in relationships, and perpetuates problems rather than solving them. The reality is that while it feels easier to avoid responsibility in the short term, it only leads to greater problems down the road as the cycle of denial and blame continues. Until people are willing to face their actions and own their mistakes, meaningful change remains out of reach. Effort for others is rare unless there's a personal gain. One of the harsh realities of human nature is that people often only go out of their way to help others when there's something to be gained for themselves, whether it's recognition, a sense of self-satisfaction, or the expectation of a future return. The majority of people are motivated by what they can personally achieve through their efforts. While acts of kindness and altruism do exist, they are frequently driven by the promise of some form of reward, even if that reward is intangible, like a boost in social status or self-worth. This tendency is rooted in the human desire for self-preservation and personal gain. We are wired to act in ways that benefit our own well-being, whether it's for immediate satisfaction or long-term advantage. This is why many people will volunteer, donate, or go out of their way to help only when it aligns with their personal interests or when there's a clear benefit involved. Without the promise of a return, true selflessness often feels harder to come by. The uncomfortable truth is that while most people are capable of compassion, genuine selfless effort is rare. Many of us struggle to act without an expectation of gain, and even when we do help, it's often because of the emotional
or social rewards it brings. This bias towards self-interest creates a world where kindness and generosity are transactional rather than truly altruistic. To break this cycle, we must learn to give and help without expectation, fostering a culture of true selflessness. Fear of rejection shapes most actions. Fear of rejection is a powerful force that influences much of what we do, often without us even realizing it. From the way we present ourselves in social settings to the decisions we make in our personal and professional lives, this deep-seated fear can dictate our behavior. Humans are inherently social creatures, and the need for acceptance is hardwired into our psyche. Rejection, whether from a peer group, a romantic partner, or in the workplace, feels like a personal attack, challenging our sense of self-worth and belonging. As a result, we go to great lengths to avoid situations where we might be rejected, even if it means suppressing our true selves or making compromises. The fear of rejection can manifest in a variety of ways: avoiding confrontation, people-pleasing, or downplaying our own desires to fit in. It leads us to conform to social norms, say things we don't truly believe, or make decisions that are not in our best interests, simply to be accepted by others. This fear can even keep us from pursuing opportunities or taking risks, whether it's speaking up in a meeting, applying for a new job, or expressing our true feelings to someone we care about. The painful truth is that the constant drive to avoid rejection often limits our potential, stifling authentic connections and preventing personal growth. We sacrifice our individuality and opportunities just to maintain a semblance of social approval. Fear of rejection may keep us safe in the short term, but in the long run, it leaves us trapped in cycles of insecurity, never fully stepping into who we truly are or achieving what we are capable of.